Hey everyone, my name is Nikhil and I'm very excited to welcome you back to our community after a short break. So I hope you have been doing well and are excited as I am about what's coming today. So I've been working tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you something special and something that many of you have been asking for a while, a complete in-depth React course. Yeah, you heard it right. It's a complete in depth React course where you will learn everything about React in depth. So, we'll start from the basics of the React and then we will move on to the intermediate things. Then we will move on to the advanced things using the performance optimizations. And then we will build some real world projects and we are gonna deploy that. So, whether you are a beginner diving into the world of web development or you are a seasoned developer who is looking to master React in depth, so this course is developed taking you in mind. So we'll be covering everything from basics to advanced concepts and with taking your web development skills to a next level. But you'll ask me that why React? So, well, React has become a go-to library for building modern and dynamic user interfaces. And in this course, we will explore the ins and outs of the React and will be using its power to create efficient and scalable applications. And you may also have heard about the Next.js. So if you want to learn Next.js, then you should have a complete knowledge of the React. So the base is the React for Next.js, and Next.js is also a great framework, and we have plans for putting out a complete tutorial on Next.js as well. So for this tutorial, this is a 3-phase course. So the tutorials will be out in phases. So first phase is out today on 1st Jan 2024 and a happy new year. So it is a total of more than 12 hours of content for completely free. You don't need to pay anything and the tutorials will be out on YouTube. So the first phase is out today. And again, before we dive into the course content, make sure you subscribe and click on the notification bell so you don't miss any phases or updates about this channel. So trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming from this channel now. And I can't wait to join you on this journey. So stay tuned and let's code something amazing together. And again, welcome back. Hey everyone. So let's get started with the React. So what you can expect from this course is you are going to learn the React from complete scratch to the advanced level where you will be building the production ready and dynamic applications with the React. So let's get started. So my name is Nikhil and I will be your instructor throughout this course. So let's get started. So what is the React? So I think you already know about the React. So if you don't know about the React, so it's a JavaScript library for building the reliable and dynamic user interfaces for the web. So React is mainly used for building the dynamic and single page applications where the UI updates are very frequent to the web development. So before learning the React, we need to learn that why do we even need React? So we already have a couple of technologies. We already have the Laravel PHP applications. We already have the Java applications. We already have the C# ASP.NET applications. And we even have the normal HTML, CSS, JavaScript applications where we can build the user interfaces for the web. So why do we need the React? What is the need for it? So let's learn that. So the problem statement with traditional web development approach was there was some points that to be considered with the React. So the first problem statement that we had was the web development challenges. So the major challenge of web development was manipulating the DOM. So manipulating the DOM directly with the JavaScript was error prone and it led to complex and heavy code which was very harder to maintain. And as the application grow in size, the complexity, managing the state and updating the state and UI of the applications became extremely difficult to handle. So the same problem was there in all other technologies. That could be Laravel, that could be the Java applications, the C# applications, because the HTML was being rendered on the web and updating the UI was extremely difficult for them. And the second challenge that we faced was the lack of reusability. So there was lack of clear and efficient way to create some components for the web. So code bases often suffered from duplication, making it challenging to maintain the code, maintain the consistency of the code, and there was unclear way for building the components. So there were no consistency of building the components where we can reuse some code. Like if you want to create the HTML application, you have to create the same HTML structure in all of the folder directories where they become the routes. And the another thing was it was very hard to maintain the clear code architecture in the web development. So another challenge that the traditional web development faced was the complex data bindings. So data bindings was very difficult for the traditional web applications because it led to very poor type of code for that, because the data bindings is very important for any type of web application. So React solved this problem by creating only one directional way of binding a data to a component. So these were the traditional web development problems that we faced before the React. So there were also a couple of tools before the React. So the main tool was the jQuery, which solved a couple of problems with the traditional web approach. So jQuery was very popular JavaScript library and it is still used, and it simplified the DOM manipulation and AJAX request. So while it eased some of the pain points of the traditional web development approach, but it didn't provide a clear structure for building the complex UIs and managing the state. So still there was some need for the React even after the born of the jQuery. So now we know the problems with the traditional web development approach. And now let's see that why should we use the React and what problems does the React solve? Because React will not solve all of the problems. So no technology can solve all of the problems. So React can solve a couple of problems with the traditional web development approach, because no technology is perfect. So React provides you an approach of the declarative UI. So what does this mean? So React addressed these challenges by introducing a declarative approach for building the dynamic user interfaces, and developers could describe that how the user interface should look in different states, and React would efficiently update the document object model, the DOM, and match the actual current state of your application. So manipulating the DOM is very easy with the React because it provides you an efficient way to do that. And we have the updating the state and the UI, so we can dynamically update the state and UI without refreshing the page. And then the second problem which it solved was the components based architecture. So what does this mean? So your application would be breaked into components. So take this image for a reference. So I picked this image from Google, so credit goes to the respected owners for them. So you can see here we have a component of a layout. So suppose that could be a function if you don't know about the components. So this is just the arrow function of the JavaScript. So here first content that we have the div. So div is a container, we all know that. And inside the div we have three components. So these are the components. So suppose there is an application, and every application has a navigation bar, have the main content, and can have the side panel. So the component based architecture, what it will do, so it will break your whole application into some independent components. So that could be a navbar, so it will be an independent component which can be used anywhere. So it is just a function which can be used anywhere. You can take that as a reference. We have a content, you can use that content anywhere inside any application, and you can use the content after the side panel as well. And there you have a side panel, and it is completely reusable component. And here you have the container in which you are rendering everything. So suppose that could be your main application, and these are your components. So with this, the React component based architecture, it allowed the developers to create reusable components, and this approach improved the code maintainability. So it was very easy to manage the code, and it encouraged the development of consistent design system. So there was a consistent approach to build some components. And the main thing which React introduces was the virtual DOM. So what is a DOM? So it is a DOM which is updated dynamically with the React. So it only updates those components and those areas in the web development, in the web page where the state was changed. So only the necessary parts of the actual DOM would be updated, and it will improve your performance as well, because with the traditional approach, if you update the DOM, then your complete web page is updated. So with the virtual DOM, only those side of the web page would be updated where the state needs to be reflected, where the latest state needs to be reflected. And another problem which it solved is unidirectional data flow. So it introduces an approach with the one direction flow with the props. So props is a concept of the React which we will learn after some time. So it is one directional flow of data to all of the components. So with using these things, you will have an easy understanding of how the data changes and it is propagated to the application components. And this solved multiple issues regarding the two-way data bindings with other libraries like Angular and all. So these were the problems which the React solved. And now let's move on and let's just start with the React. So before starting that, again, there's another point to mention. So there are some requirements. So there are some prerequisites which you need to take care of. So you need to have the knowledge of the JavaScript. A basic or intermediate knowledge would also be very helpful, and you should have the clear understanding of promises, the async await and the event loop of the JavaScript, because it is very useful with the React. And you should know the syntax of ES6 and updated ES6 and more versions. So it will be helpful for you to learn with the React, because the React uses greater than ES6 versions in their environment. And if you have great knowledge on all these things, so let's get started again. So let's move forward. So we'll be learning some core concepts of the React, starting with the components, then to the JSX, then to the state, then to the hooks, and then the inbuilt features of the React. So now we should be starting with the core concepts, and the first core concept that we have is the components. So let's get started with the first feature of the React, which is the components. So let's get started with the first core concept of the React, which is components. So what are the components? So components are the building blocks for creating the UI. So let's see it practically. So suppose that's a web page. So this is on the web and this is on the mobile. So you can see in this application there are a couple of things. So there is a header, a navigation bar, then there is a side menu that can be used for any filters and all, and there we have some cards and we have the footer, and the same is being done on the responsiveness on the mobile as well. So you can see these are the components. So what are they? So you can see the first thing that we have is we have the header. So here we have the header, and now the header would be a standalone component for your application. And there you can see what could be another component again. So you can see there is a sidebar. So sidebar could actually be another component that you can use. You can see we have a sidebar component. You can build this sidebar component, and there are another components as well. You can see there are some cards. So you can see all of the cards are one cards component, and for each card item we have the card item component. And again you can see there is a footer. So you can see this is a footer for your application. So this is also a component. So what do I mean with all of that? So components are building blocks for creating the UI. So this is a UI. So this complete web page is a UI, and there we have a component of the header. So header is a standalone component. Sidebar is a component, the complete cards component, each card item component, and we have the footer component as well. And you can have as many components as you want in your UI. So any particular area which displays some data into your web application is a component. So for learning more on the components, I am moving on to the react.dev, which is the official website of the React. And there you can see this is the official homepage of the React where you can learn the React. You can see write components with code and markup. So you can see there is this web page. You can see there is an example. Like you can see if you move on, you can see I'm going to show you another thing. I think they have updated something. So let's move on again to the top. You can see here we have a component. You can see we have the video list.js, which is just a function over there. You can see in this file we have a function which returns some code which is a component. You can see what we have inside this. You can see inside the return statement we have a section. So section is a complete container for your all of the application. You can see the whole application contains a main parent which is a section. Then you can see we have a heading, we have the 3 videos. So this 3 videos is being generated from this h2 heading. And from there you can see after that we have the videos. So videos is an array. You can see videos can be any array. You have a video's length that are receiving some data. So there are each video item component, and from there you can see the each video is being rendered from the video component. You can see there's a video component that you can create. So each thing is being rendered from a video. So you can see these are the components. So this is very basic example for the component. You can see you have the heading, then you have each of the video rendered onto there. So this code which we have written over there, is the JSX. You can see this markup syntax is called JSX. It is a JavaScript syntax extension popularized by React. So we'll be learning the JSX in just a minute. So now let's move on. So let's just move on and click on the learn. Then inside this describing the UI, we can click on the your first component. You can click on that. And from there you can see components are the core concepts of the React, and they are the foundation on which you build the user interfaces directly from the scratch. So you can see this is the component example. You can see the building approach. You can see the building blocks over there. So suppose you write the HTML code. You can see you have the article tag. Suppose that could be your article. Then you have the h1 heading. That is your first component. Then you have the ordered list. You have some li elements, the list items. Then you close the article. You can see this represents the article tag, and there are a couple of fields over there. So just like this article tag, so just like this component over there, which you can create over HTML. So these things can be used with the React JSX approach as well. So let's move a bit down. You can see we have a section of defining a component. You can see we have something like export default function, a profile. So we create a function which is a component. You can see inside the React, we export a default function. So now the profile can be a component because it returns some JSX code. It returns some code, it returns some JSX code. So it will become a component. You can see inside this what we have is we have the image. You can see we have the image, we have the source, and then we have the alt for the image. So inside this return statement, whatever you write, whatever HTML, whatever JSX you write is being generated on the web. So suppose if you remove this image over there, if you remove this image and you render the h1 tag over there, like the h1, you can render the hello. So let's see what happens. You can see now you have the hello into the web page. And there you can see after the h1, if you remove the h1, if you just add here, suppose the paragraph tag, or you just add the link tag over there, like a tag over there, like this, the a, and you can have the ref tag over there. That could be, we can have this slash, and after that you can have the link over there like this, the link, and there you can see now what we will have over there. So suppose you write an anchor tag over there like a, and then you have the ref equals to slash app, then you have the link. You can see now the link would be created. So that's how we define a component in the React. We export a default function and it returns some JSX code. You can see this was a very simple code that we have written. So you can see that's how we create a component. And point to note that the React components, their name must start with a capital letter or they would not work. So that's how it works. You can see. So the steps which we done with this app.js, we exported a function which is a component. We defined that function over there. You can see with a capital P over there, and there you can see we have the markup over there, the markup which returns some code inside that, like the image tag over there. And you can see that's how it works. You can see you have the return statement, you can have the div and all of the things like that. So this is all about the components of the React and how we can build the components. So now we'll be seeing the practical example in a moment once we learn the JSX. So let's get started with the JSX now. So now we have covered the concept of the components and we have some knowledge about the components. Although we haven't implemented it practically, but we will do it in some time. So till then we can move on to the next feature of React, which is the JSX. So what is the JSX? So I'm adding an image for a reference. So let's learn that what is a JSX. So it's a syntax extension for JavaScript. A syntax extension means we can extend the JavaScript syntax that looks similar to XML or HTML. So if you see the image for a reference, we have const invalid element equals to this block of code. You can see this is JavaScript. We are declaring an invalid element over there, and inside that we have some code. And inside that what we are doing is we are rendering the HTML over there. We have the h1 tag of the hello React. Then we have the paragraph tag with this is a JSX example. And again the second element is also there. The const valid element equals to this element, and here we have div, we have the h1 tag, we have the paragraph tag and all. So what we understand from this is JSX is a combination of JavaScript and XML and JavaScript and HTML. You can see here we have the JavaScript and here we have the HTML. So JSX is a standard of coding. It's not a programming language, but it's a standard of how we can combine the JavaScript and HTML over there. And JSX can be used with React to develop rich and dynamic React applications. So we can use JSX with React. So React is not JSX. So JSX is different and React is different. So JSX, we write the JSX into the React, and then the JSX is transformed into JavaScript using a preprocessor like Babel libraries before being rendered by the browser. So the JSX is converted to the JavaScript code and then it is shown to the web to enable the rich and dynamic applications. So that's it for the JSX. So now we have some knowledge on the JSX, and now let's move on to the React's official documentation and let's see what does the React says about the JSX. So here I'm into the React.tab once again, and I'm into the block of describing the UI and writing the markup with JSX. So JSX is a syntax extension for JavaScript that lets you write the HTML-like markup inside a JavaScript file. And there you can see we have the HTML, we have the div tags over there. We write the same things inside the JSX, although we have some JavaScript functions as well that we can write over there. And now let's move on. Please scroll down and you can come here, like converting the HTML to JSX. So what we can see over there is, so if I just move on again, so here we have the h1 tag, like we have the to-do list of anything. We have the image over there. So here we have the image tag over there. That's how we write the HTML, right? Then we have the UL, the unordered list. We have the list items over there. So if we want to convert this HTML to JSX, then what we can do? So let's move on. So first you can see what did we do to create a component. So we saw that how we can create a component. We can have the export default function, the to-do list, that can be the T should be capital, the first letter should be the capital, and inside the return statement we return the JSX code. So again, let's move on to the app.js over there. So here what we can see over there, you can see export default function, to-do list, and here we have the h1 tag. It is perfectly okay. And here we have the image tag, and you can also see an error like this does not quite work, and I will let you know that why. And again, you can see after the image, we have the unordered list, we have some list items. So everything is fine over there instead of this image. So I will let you know again that why it is happening. And now let's move on. So there you can see JSX is how we can write this. You can see we can write some JSX code over there. This is an image, this is an unordered list, we have some list elements, and that's how it works. So we write the markup of the HTML within the JavaScript inside the return statement to render these things into the web. So now if we see this error, like you can see we are getting an error on the image tag. So what could be this error? So if you scroll down, it is also mentioned that why this error is coming. This is because the JSX is stricter and has few more rules than HTML. So inside the HTML, you can just write the image tags without closing that, mentioning again that without closing them, you can add the image tag and it would be completely rendered onto the web page and there are no issues. So there are no any rules about that in the HTML, but inside the JSX, there are some rules which we need to follow, like JavaScript and TypeScript. So the TypeScript have some rules like the static typing. So again, there is some differences between the HTML and JSX that we have some rules inside the JSX. So let's learn about some rules. So let's move on to the rules of JSX. So writing the JSX is fun, but we need to remember and we need to take care of these rules. So there should be only one single root element that could be the wrapper for your entire application. So let's see an example. So I'm moving on to the Visual Studio Code. So here I have prepared one file like jsxtools.jsx, and here I have prepared some of the things and all of the rules of the JSX. So let's expand the first one. So there you can see there should be single root element as per the rule number 1. So if I uncomment this code over there, like you can see there are two elements. The first one is the invalid element and second one is the valid element. So inside this you can see the valid element, it doesn't show any error because here you can see here we have one wrapper. You can see the div is currently the wrapper, but if we remove this div, you can see now we would be seeing the errors. So that's why we have one rule that there should be a single root element over there. And there you can see here we have the invalid element. So there you can see if we add the div at the top, so here we have the div at the top, and if we just wrap everything with this div, now you can see now this invalid element is also the valid one. So that's the rule number 1 of the JSX. So I'm not removing it again because this file would be shared to you as an example. And I will comment this code as well. So let's move on to the rule number 2. So inside the rule number 2, what do we have? So each element must be closed with closing tags. So inside the HTML, there is no any rule of closing a tag, but inside the JSX, we need to close the tag. So whatever tag do we add, we need to close that tag over there. So let's move on. Let's just see the rule. So each element must be closed with the enclosing tags. So if we expand the second rule, you can see again, I will now just uncomment these things over there. Like here you can see we have the valid JSX over there. So inside the valid, you can see we have the const element equals to the input, type equals to text, and there you can see the input tag is self-closing tag. So we add this slash at the end of the bracket. And here we have the paragraph tag. So you can see this is a paragraph tag and this is also closed. But here you can see inside this div, if we add, you can see there's also a div. So if we do not close this div, then you can see what do we have? We have an error like the div has no corresponding closing tag. So each tag must be closed, and whether it should be div or whether it can be an image tag as well. So that could be an image tag. So if we remove the enclosing tag over there, you can see again we are getting the error that image tag has no corresponding closing tag. So that specifies the rule number 2 that each element must be closed with closing tags. So again, I will now just comment all of these things once again. And now let's move on. Let's just see the third rule. So if you see the third rule, you can see the attribute, the class name instead of class. So inside the HTML, what do we have? So we have the class instead of the class name, but here inside the JSX, we need to add the class name inside the camel case attributes. So every event or every function do we have, it should be having the camel case attributes inside the camel case formatted attributes. So let's move on. Let's just expand the third rule. You can see if I will now just uncomment all of these things, just uncomment that. So there you can see we have the element, we have the div, and here you can see instead of the class, we have the class name that we provide. So we do not have the class. You can see the class is not there. So there is the class name for that. And there you can see inside the button as well, you can see there is a const button. We have a button, and here as well we have the class name. And you can see we have an on-click event as well. So here you can see we have an on-click. So inside the normal HTML, we have the on-click like this, all small letters. But inside the JSX, it should be having the camel case attributes. So there you can see now if we hover the on-click, you can see now this is identified by the React. So that's the rule number 3. So let's close this once again. So let's comment it out and let's close that. And then you can see, let's see the 4th rule of the JSX. What do we have? So we need to use the inline CSS styles if we need to add the inline styles. So how can we use the inline CSS styles? So let's just expand the 4th rule. You can see we can just expand that. So here you can see now we have expanded. So you can say inside the element, if we need to add this style, so it should be an object providing the inline styles of the properties. You can see here we have the styles object and here we have the color blue, the font size that could be the 16 pixels. So here as well you can see the style should be equals to these styles. And if you don't want to provide these styles and if you want the IntelliSense or the auto completion, so let's add another object over there. You can see all of these styles aligned over there. That could be the color of any property, that could be the color, that could be, we can have anything like we can have the background color, the background display properties as well. So all of the CSS properties are added there. That could be any accent color, any display or anything over there. So that's how we can use the inline styles over there. And the preferred way is using the styles object and using the styles. And if you don't want to use the styles, you can also use the class names over there like this. You can have the class name, and for the container class, you can define it into your CSS file. So that's the rule number 4, using the inline styles. So let's comment it and let's unexpand that. So let's see the 5th rule as well. So expressions for dynamic rendering. So till now we have seen the static content over there. You can say inside the JSX rule, we have the element, we have the paragraph, we have this static text over there like styling the JSX. And here as well, if we expand that, you can see we have the hello React. So what if we want to change the text of the button dynamically? So we want the dynamic rendering. So that's why we use the expressions. So we use the expressions for dynamic rendering. So if we expand this, you can see if I now uncomment that, you can see what do we have? We have the const first name equals to Nikhil. We have the normal JavaScript variable with the const last name equals to Thadani. And here we have the element, we have the paragraph, the first name is, and then we have the curly braces. So these are the expressions in the form of JSX. You can see if we need to add any dynamic code, we add these curly braces to add the expressions. So inside this, the first name would be the Nikhil, the last name could be the Thadani. So that's how we need to write the expressions for dynamic rendering of the content. So let's again uncomment that. So let's again comment that and let's move on to the rule number 6. So use conditional operators instead of conditional statements. So we do not need to write, or we don't have to write the if-else conditions, the switch conditions inside the JSX. So instead, what do we do? So we use the conditional operators. So that could be the ternary operator, that could be nullish, and operators or operators like that. So if I just now uncomment that over there, if I uncomment that, you can see we have the const value equals to 1 and with the const string equals to an empty string. So there you can see what do we have. If we just uncomment this invalid element, you can see we cannot write the if else conditions over there inside the JSX. Even if we use the expressions, we cannot write the JavaScript code of if else and the switch conditions. So instead, what do? We just add the conditional operators, like we have the div, and then inside the expressions we can check if we have the value. So if we have the value, then we can print the grade, or if we don't have the value, we can just print this sorry, because these are the JavaScript operators like this, the question mark and this. So this is again the ternary operator. And again, we have the valid element 2. So we can check if we have the string, like if we don't have the string. So if we have the string, then we would be writing the string over there. But if we don't have the string, then this condition would match the no string provided. So this is again the OR operator. And we could also use AND operator and other operators as well. Like if we have this string, we can add this AND operator over there. Then we can have here this string provided like that, string provided. Because now if we have the string, then this would be rendered. So that's how it works. And so that's the rule number 6. And now let's just have a look at the last rule as well. So if we see the last rule, you can see the self-closing tags must be closed. So we have already saw So we already saw this inside the rule number 2, I think. So let's just expand the 7. You can see inside this what we have. So if we have the image tag, if we have the self-closing tags, that could be the input, image and other tags like the BR tags as well. So they should be closed. You can see we have the invalid element. So this tag is not closed anymore. We need to just close this tag by writing this slash before this operator, before this bracket to close that. So we just need to add this to close the tag. You can see again, we have the image, we have the input tags and they all are closed. So that's how it works. And that was the rule number 7. So with that, you can see now you have the knowledge of all of the rules of the JSX. And now it's time for us. You can see now there was a lot of theory for us, starting from the components and the JSX, then the rules of JSX. And now it's time to start working on the application with the React. So now the next step for us would be, now we would be creating a React application. And we will see that how we can create the React applications, though there are some libraries and though there are some other rules to create the React application. So we will have a look into that. And now from this step further, now we will be seeing the practical examples with everything. So let's get started for that. Now we have pretty good understanding of the JSX and for the components. And now we need to move on, and now we can create a brand new React application on our own on our local system, and we can implement it all together that we have learned throughout this course. So let's move on and let's see that how we can create our first React.js application on our local machine, and we can try all these steps together. So creating your first React application is very simple. So there are a couple of libraries that help us implement that. So the first and most popular library is the Create React app. So it was the widely used for creating the React application. Even everyone would have used this library, the Create React app, because during the times of 2016 to 20, only the Create React app was popular. And there's another library which is Vite, which is like there were some problems with the Create React app. The development process and the compilation process was a little bit slow. So Vite again launched, and it included and it improved the performance and the development experience of the Create React app so that we can ship and build our React applications very fast. And then there's another library which is the Next.js. So Next.js is not a library, it's a framework that helps creating the React application for production. Right, for the Next.js, it includes a more couple of features with Next.js, like we can have some middleware approach, we can have server-side rendering, client-side rendering and all. So Next.js is a different framework which uses the React as the ecosystem. So if we want to learn the React, then we want to focus on these two frameworks, on one of these two frameworks, like that could be the Create React app or that could be the Vite as well. So what we can do? So we can move on to the npmjs.com and we can see which library has most users for now. So here I'm into the npm.js and let's just search for these two packages. The first would be the Create React app. So we can have the create-react, that could be we can have the app, and from there what we can see, if we just hit enter, you can see what we will see over there. So you can see we have the Create React app. So it was latest published 2 years ago. You can see the weekly downloads is around 111,000. And from there you can see during the period of around 2020, 2023. So downloads were huge. You can see around 61 lakhs and all. So there was this amount of downloads as well. But after the launch of Next.js, the whole community moved to the Next.js because it enabled a couple of more features even with the React, like server-side rendering, and we have the performance approach, sending the HTTP request and fetching the data during the page generation and all. So Next.js improved that things with the React as well. So you can see we have the Create React app. It has lower downloads, but as compared to the Vite, if we move on with the Vite over there, you can see the Vite has almost more than 7 times downloads over there. So we can try with the Vite. So with the Vite also you can just learn React because it is simply same, but the development or the compilation process is simple. So Vite is also same, but only the compilation process is different. So we can just use Vite for learning and building the React. And Vite is not only used for the React, you can also create the normal vanilla JavaScript applications with the Vite as well. So without wasting much time, let's dive into that. And before everything, once again, if we move on and let's see that what the React says about the installation, you can see the React has been designed from start of gradual adoption. So there are a couple of libraries which adopted the React to build over there. You can see try React. We can just try the React over there as well. We also tried that. We can try React locally. We are here. So we can move on. So there you can see, let's move on. Let's click on the next. So there are the production grade React frameworks. So the Next.js, but you can only move to Next.js once you have great knowledge of the React. And then we have the Remix as well. Remix also allows you, it's also a framework built on the top of React. But here now what we will do, so we will just use here the Vite. So let's move on. Let's just search here the Vite over there. The Vite, we have the next generation front-end tooling and it is very fast. It is lightning fast. We have rich features, the optimized production build and all things. So we would be using the Vite for a React application. So we can just move on. So we can just click on get started. And from there, what we can do. So here is the command for creating a new React.js application, a new Vite configuration for our application. And before that, again, you need to install the Node.js in your system. So you need to install the Node.js. If you don't have the Node.js installed, so please install the Node.js because it is needed for building the React applications. So we need the Node.js to build the React application because the Node.js provides us a development server where we can run a React. So let's install that. And after that, you need to open your code editor, your favorite code editor. So here I'm using the Visual Studio Code. So if you need to install the VS Code, you can just move on. You can search for the VS Code over there and you can install that from there. So you can just install according to your OS. I'm using the Windows, so that's why I've installed the Windows version. And after that, we can just move on and we can create a brand new React.js application. So for that, you can just open the terminal. So you can move on. And from there, we have the terminal over there. We can select a new terminal. And after that, you can see here, we have my folder. We have the F, we have the 2024, then we have the React. And now I will create a brand new React.js application inside this React folder. So this is a simple application. This is a sample. So what I will do is I will now just create a command. So the application name could be the components and JSX. So let's move on to the Vite to create a new React.js application. So there you can see if we are using the npm. So we are already using the npm. So we haven't used the yarn, pnpm or one. So here we'll be using the npm. So we can just copy this command and we can paste inside our terminal. So we can have the npm create a Vite @latest and we can hit enter. And after that, you can see it needs to install this create Vite package. So we can hit on Y and we can hit on enter. And from there, you can see now we need to define the name of our project. So here I need to provide the source code and all with this React application, with this complete React course. So we have the components, then we have the JSX. So that is my project name. And from there, you can see after that, the next step would be now we need to select a framework with the Vite. You can see the Vite. You can see you can also create the Vue application, the vanilla JS application, the Lit application, Svelte, we have the solid application. So here we'll be using the React. So we need to hit on React. And after that, you can see we have the TypeScript approach, then we have the JavaScript approach. So we can use the JavaScript approach for now and we can hit enter. And after that, you can see the components -JSX application has been created. Now we can move on. We can have the change directory into the component/JSX. Then we can move on. So inside this, you can see now we do not have any node modules. So we need to hit npm I to install all of the modules. We can have the npm install and everything done. So after the npm install, the node modules would be installed inside this folder and a brand new React.js application would be ready. So the node modules are installed and now let's see the folder directories of our application. So if we open the components/JSX, so you can see the first folder that we have is the node modules. So node modules contains the packages and some libraries which runs under the hood, which makes our React application work. Then we have the public folder, and inside the public folder, we place some of the assets which are publicly available on any website. So this can include some images, some audio files, some video files that are publicly available on a web server. Then we have the source folder, and this is the main folder of our application. So inside the source folder, we have the assets. So if you want to place some of the assets, some internal assets of your application, you can place that into the assets. Then we have couple of files like app.csx, app.jsx, index.css, the main.jsx. So let's move on to the main.jsx. So this is the main file for your application. So this is the main file where we render a root component. So there you can see this app is a component which we have rendered. So this is a component. So we have rendered here the root component. And from where we have find the root, because if we want to render the app component, if we want to render anything, we want the element from the DOM where we want to insert some data, right? Inside the DOM, we want to insert dynamically. So you can see here, we have the index.html file. If you open this file, you can see inside this file, we have only one div. So inside the whole content, we only have one div, id equals to the root. So what React will do inside the main component, inside the main.jsx file, React will create a root component from this create root, the React DOM.create root, and then you can say it is getting the element from the document.get element by id with the root, and then it is rendering the app component over there. So the main file will create a root and it will render the main component, and the app here, you can see there is one app. If you just control and click on this, control and click, so you can see this app is a component. So this is a component, the function app. So inside every React.js application, if you use the React application, so there is the app component, which is the root component of your application, which renders everything your application needs. So there you can see inside the main, we have the strict mode, and then we have here the React. So here we have the strict mode, and here we have the app, which we are rendering. So after that, we can move on. So we can move on to the app.jsx. So there you can see we have a couple of things over there. So we can keep this as it is. And then you can see we have some CSS files. So we have the index.css, which is the root CSS file of your application. So onto the top level, we have the index.css file. And if you need some designs, some styles, some independent styles for an independent component, you can just create the CSS file according to the name of your component. Like app.jsx is a main root component. So you can have the app.css file, and these styles can work on the app.jsx component as well. If we just close the source folder, then we have the ESLint file for the code quality issues. We can just improve the quality of our code with using the ESLint. Then we have the git ignore file, which will just ignore a couple of files when we publish our application, when we push our code to the GitHub. So these files and folders would be excluded from GitHub. Then we have again the index.html file. We already discussed that. Then we have the package.lock.json, which contains some information about our packages. The main is package.json. Inside any Node.js application, you can see we have the package.json file, which is a package. So every Node.js application, because React runs on the Node server, so we have the package.json, which contains a complete information, a complete package for your application. You can see the name of our application components JSX, the private type is module, scripts, we have the dev, and inside the scripts, there are some scripts which we run. So the script could be the dev. So if we want to test our application inside the local development server, we use the dev over there. If you want to build our application and send it to the production server, we have the build command. If you want to use the lint in which we want to find all of the fixes that our code needs, then we have the lint. If you want to have the preview of the final build version, the production version, if you want to get the preview of that, we run the preview command. Then we have the dependencies. So the dependencies which we require is the React, and we have the React DOM. So these two are the internal dependencies of the React, which is used to create the React application, and the version is 18.2. Then we can move on. So with the readme file, which is used for the GitHub, then with the configuration file for the Vite, which we can keep it as default. And after that, if we can run this application, the starter application, we can just move on to the package.json. We can find the command of the dev. You can see this is a dev command. So we can run this. We can have the npm we can have the run, we can have the dev. So once we run this command, so you can see now the local development server is open on the port of 5173. So we can control and click on that, and you can see it is currently open inside this. So you can see 5173 is currently open. You can see now we have the Vite plus React. So you can say this is a React application. This is your first React application. It is just a boilerplate code, but you can see now you can run your React into your local system. We have the count. If you just hit on this variable, you can see now the count is 1, count is 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see the rendering is very fast. And you can see the edit source /app.jsx and save to test the HMR. And after that, you can see click on the Vite and React logos to learn more. Once you click on the Vite, you are redirected to the Vite. If you click on the React, you are redirected to the React.js. And now let's move on. So let's move on to the main component which we are rendering, the app.jsx. So here you can see what we are doing. So again, as per the rules of the JSX, we have one root component. You can see only one root component. There's empty tag over there. It's not an issue. You can also create the empty tags for a root component. So here we have one root component, and from there we have a couple of children elements. You can see we have a couple of elements, like we have this div, we have the h1, we have this div, we have this paragraph. And if you remove everything from there, if you remove the everything, and even if you remove this thing over there, if we remove this, and if we remove everything over there, even the CSS file, let's remove that. So there you can see, if we just save and if we open this, you can see if we refresh, we have nothing inside our web page. We have nothing. So there you can see, if we enter anything, like inside the return statement, if we just add here the div, and inside the div, we can render the hi. If we add the hi, so let's move on to the browser. So now we will see the hi over there. You can see now we have the hi into the web page. So I think there are some CSS styles which we need to remove inside the index.css, because from that we are seeing the hi over there inside the center of the screen. So let's remove the content from the CSS, and we can also remove from the app.css as well. So once we save, you can see now this is a complete and fresh React.js application on a web page. So here you can see now we have the hi, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. We have the app.jsx. So here we have the div. We can also create something like we can have the return, then we can have the div, then we can have the h1, like we have the welcome to my React application. We have the welcome to my React app, and after that we can render another h1 element, or we can have the h2 element, like we can have the h2 over there like this, the h2, and here as well we should have the h2 over there. We can have by Indian coders like this. So if we save and if we move on to the application, so you can see welcome to my React app. You can see by Indian coders. So you can see that's how you can build your React application. So as far as now, you can see if this course is perfectly relevant to you, so let me know in the comments. So because even I was also facing some of the issues when I was beginner in the React. So I've covered each and everything which is required for learning the React. And now you can see now we have the app.jsx component. We have the div, we have the h1, we have the h2, and let's create another component. So we already know that how to create the components. If you don't know, you can just anytime move on to react.dev over there, the react.dev, and from there you have the learn React, you have the describing the UI, importing your components. So what you can do, so suppose if you want to create a new component, could be the profile. So let's move on. So let's create a component of the profile, and we can just display something like details of the user, the name, the email, and there could be something like phone number of the user. So let's create that component. So we'll create a new file over there. Inside this, we have the profile dot, we have the JSX. So here we have the profile.jsx, and as per the structure, we can just create a new function. We can have the function, or we should use the ES6. So yes, we can have the const, we can have the profile here. So that should be equals to an arrow function, and inside that we want to return something. So we can return a div over there, we can return a div, and inside that we can just return here some details, like we can have the h1 tag over there, we can have the name, and we can have it the Nikhil like that. The name should be the Nikhil, and then we could have here the email as well. So we can have the paragraph for the email. So we can have the paragraph tag. Then it should be, we can have the email over there, and then we can enter some more details, like we can enter my phone number as well. So we can have the article tag over there, some like article tag from the HTML, and we can use the article tag for the closing. Then we can have the phone as well. Then I cannot share my phone number, so that could be 987654321, like this. So we can have my phone number like this. So let's render this component inside our application, and how we can render that. So if we just save, you can see there are no changes because we haven't used this profile component. So now we want to use this profile component, and how we can use that. So we can directly move on to the app.jsx over there, and from there what we can do. So suppose after this we can move on. So below h2 we can just use the profile. So first what we need to do is we can move on to the top of the file, and we can have the import the profile component. So for importing that, what we need to do is we need to export this profile component as well, right? We want to export that. So we can have the export default, that could be, we can have the profile. So now we have exported the profile component as a default, and now let's move on. So there inside the app.jsx, now what we will do is we will import the profile component. You can see the auto completion of the VS Code help me do that. We have import the profile from /profile because it is in the same directory. And after the h2, now what we can do, we can use the br tag over there like this. We have the br, and we can close that, and we can just render here the profile like that. We have the profile, and we can use this component like this, like /, and we can close the tag of the component. So now let's see, there are no any errors, and let's see what happens on the web page. So there you can see the name is Nikhil, the email is there, and the phone number is there. You can see everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now congratulations on creating your very first component and using it inside your main application structure. So that's how we build the React application so far. You can see it was very easy to work with the React, and it is completely dynamic over there. So once you save something, it would be instantly refreshed, and it would be instantly visible to your web page. So congratulations on this step. So now you can see if we move on again. So if we move on to the profile component once again, so there you can see we have used these static values like name Nikhil, the email this, the phone number this. So I showed you earlier that how you can use the dynamic things over there. So you can see that was the file over there. So inside that, what I showed you is how we can use the dynamic things. So there you can see use expressions for dynamic rendering. So if I open this, you can see how we can use that. So again, I can uncomment that. So there you can see now we have the const first name equals to this, const last name equals to this, and const element equals to this. So you can see what we can do over there. So we can just define the variables before the return statement. So we can have the const, we can have the name, that should be equals to, we can have the Nikhil, we can have the Thadani over there like this, and again we can have the email as well. So we can have the const, we can have the email, that could be, we can have the Nikhil. Again we can just copy this, Nikhil Thadani official @gmail.com, that's my email. Then we can have the const, we can have the phone over there. So that should be equals to this number over there like this. We can just have this number inside the strings. And now if you want to render all of that, how we can use that? We can use the expressions. So let's move on. So we have the name of the Nikhil. So instead of the Nikhil, what we can use the dynamic expressions over there. We can use the dynamic values inside this expressions. We can have the name over there. We can have the name equals to name. For the email, that could be, we can have the email over there like that. We have the email like this. So I think the tag was there. I can just move on. So here we have the email, then we have the phone. So inside this phone, now what we can do? So again, we can use the expressions, and here we can use the phone like that. And that's how it's gonna work over there. So here you can see now we have the name, we have the email, then we have the phone. So let's move on. So let's move on to the application. You can see it is still same. So if we change anything over there like this, if we have the phone or if we have the Nikhil Thadani, if we just remove this over there, you can see instantly it would be updated. You can see that's how we can use the dynamic rendering over there inside the React application, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So let's create another component. So let's create a component of something like we can have the list. So we can have another component that could be, we can have the list dot, we have the JSX, and inside that what we can use. So again, we can just define the component. We can have the const list. So that should be equals to a component. And inside that we can return a list. We can have the return div, and inside the div we can return a couple of list elements. So we can have at least 1 2 3 4 elements over there. We can use 4 elements, like we can have the list of all of the items, like we can have your something like h5. We can have technologies like this, and after that what we can do, so inside that we can have the li element. We can have the JavaScript over there, like the JavaScript. We have your something like, we can have the Python. We can just move on. We can have the something like, we can have the C# over there, and then we can create another list item. So that could be equals to, we can have anything like Golang like this as well. So we have the Golang. You can see now we have the list. And now if we render the list over there, if we just remove the profile, we can also remove the profile, and we should use the list. So for that, again, we need to export this component. We have the export default, that could be, we can have the list over there as well, the list, and we can use this list over there like this. So once you just enter the list over there, the VS Code auto completion will show you the intelligence over there. You can have the list and it will import it from the list. After that, you just run this component, and after that you can see we have the technologies, we have the JavaScript, Python, C#, Golang. And you can see inside the list item, there are these static items over there, like the list of the JavaScript, of the C#, of the Golang. So how can we make this dynamic? So we can again move on at the top. So here what we will do, so we can have the array of the list. So we can have the technologies like that. Technologies, so that should be equals to an array. So inside the array what we can use, so we can have the JavaScript over there. We can have the JavaScript, and then what we can use, so we can have the Python over there like this. We have the Python, then we can move on. So we can have the C# over there, like the C#. Then finally we can move on. We can have the Golang as well like this. We can have the Golang. So there you can see now we have the technologies array. And now if we have some data of the array and we want to display that inside the front end, how we can do that? So again, instead of these things, we can comment it out. And after that, now what we can do? So we can again use the expressions, because here we want to use the JavaScript code, the JavaScript variables, the technologies array. So let's move on. So here what we can use, so we have the technologies dot, we can have the map. So map is available inside the JavaScript. So it iterates over each element and it returns the list of the elements. So inside the map, we can have the callback. We can have the callback of each item. Like that could be, we can have the item over there. And after that, now what do we want to do? So we can just return an element. So from the map, for each item, we can just return a React element. So it would be pretty simple for us because we already have the array. We are already iterating over there with the map. So here we just want to return the element. So what we can use, so we can just have the list item over there. We can have the list item like this, the li, and inside the li again, how we can use the item, again the expressions again. So we can have the expressions over there like this. We can have the item like that, and we can save that. So now what we are doing over there is, now we can remove that first. So what we are doing that over there, we have the technologies array. We are mapping through each item of the array. So each item is there and we are returning a component from that. Very simple. And now let's move on to the application once again. If we refresh, you can see now we have same items over there, the JavaScript, Python, C# and the Golang. If we add any other item over there, if we add any other item, like we can have the Java. So once we save, now we'll be seeing the Java over there. You can see it is instantly fast. You can see everything is being rendered as a standalone element over there, as a standalone element. So that's how we can use the list with the React. But I want to show you something. So if we open the inspect panel, if we open the console, now we should be seeing one error. So there we have one warning. Each child in the list should have a unique key prop. So what does this mean? So if we open the React documentation and we have here the rendering of the list, So let's move on. So what we can see over there is rendering the data from arrays. So you have a list of content, we have some elements, we can move the data into an array. That's what we did. That's what we did, right? Then we have the return UL, the list items over there, we can use that. And inside that you can see we have the list items. We got the same error over there, the list. So we have the same error. So if we just compare, we have the same error because earlier we learned about the virtual DOM. So React only updates those elements where the state has been changed, where something has been changed. So suppose inside the array, if we change anything, like if we change anything from Java to, we can have another language, that could be C++. So what keys will do over there? So it identifies. So suppose in future your array changes, so any element changes. So if you are fetching the array from the server, so suppose the JavaScript value changes from the JavaScript to the S capital over there. So suppose this changes, or suppose any values inserted or deleted. So React need to know that which element has been created, which element has been removed, or which element has been updated. So React needs to identify that. So that's why we use the key over there. So key is used for several other purposes as well. Like React needs to know which element has been updated. So it will only update the state or visibility of only those elements which has been updated. So that's why we need to use here the key. So key could be any unique identifier. So suppose you have this thing over there, the JavaScript, Python, C#, Golang. So you can just provide a prop of the key. So you can have any attribute of the key. We have the key over there, and inside that you can just use any value. Like you can also just use the item value over there, like that. You can have the item over there. So that's how you can provide a key to the item. And inside the item you can see now the key knows that we have this value over there. We can update it anytime. But this is not a good practice because in some areas of your application, the keys can be duplicated. So key should always be a unique identifier for any item, for any element. So that's why we should always use an object type structure over there with the React, in which the key is always unique. So as of now, we have just provided here the key as the item itself. So let's see what happens. If we again move on to the application into the inspect panel, you can see if we just refresh it again, now we don't have any error because now we have the key. And even if we move on there, you can see they are also mentioning that like keys tell the React that which item has been updated or inserted or deleted or anything. So well chosen key helps React info that what exactly has happened and makes the correct updates to the DOM tree. So that's how it works. So we should also use an object like that. We have the ID, name, profession as well. So we should use these things over there always. So what I will do is I will now just copy this thing over there. I will now just copy this thing, copy this array over there. So copy that array of the elements over there, export const, we have the people over there. We can just copy and we can use it inside our application. We have this thing over there. We can remove the export. We have the const people, which has an array of ID, name, profession, accomplishment, the image ID. So let's render this list instead of these technologies. So what we can do, we can just customize this list item according to what we need. So let's move on. So let's remove that over there. You can see inside each list item, we have the ID, we have the name, profession, accomplishment, the image ID. So what we can do instead of the technologies, we can use here the people like that. So instead of the technologies, we can use here the people. And after that, you can see the item consists of so many things like ID, name, profession, accomplishment. So first we can fix the key. It should be item object dot ID of the item. Then inside that, what we can use, we can have some nested structure inside the list item. So we can have the div over there. What we can do, we can also use the div only. We don't need to use the list item. We can also use the div. So we can give the key to the div itself. Then we can have the item dot, we can have the ID. And after that, you can see the person has a name and the profession. So let's just display only the name and the profession. So we can again have a div element over there. And inside that, we can have the paragraph tag. That could be the name. Again, it should be the expressions. right? Again, it should be the expressions because we want to use the dynamic. We have the item dot, we can have the name. And again, we can have another paragraph that could be, we can have the profession. We have the profession, and that could be item dot, we can have the profession. You can see that's how we can do the things at our end. You can see it is working perfectly fine over there. And after that, you can see now we have a couple of list items. So now we should see everything into a web page. You can see if we again refresh over there, I think the development server was being closed. So let's open the server once again. Let's move on into CD, into the project, and npm run dev to open the local development server. You can see it is working perfectly fine. Let's again move on to the browser and refresh. Let's see what happens. You can see now we have a couple of things. We have the array technologies, it should be updated. We should have the peoples. We have the peoples over there. And after that, let's move on over there. Let's move on. And after that, we have the peoples over there. And then we can move on. So here we have the peoples, the name this, the name this, the name this, the name this, the name, the profession, and all. And what if you wanna style that? So if you want to style that, you can just use the styling for this div only. You can just provide a style property over there, this style, and inside that what you can use, you can have the border over there. There could be the border over there like this. The border could be, we can have the 1 pixels. We have the solid, we can have the black like that. We have the solid black over there, the border color and the solid. Then we can have some padding over there like this. We can have the padding of around 10 pixels. Then we can have the border radius as well. The border radius like this. Border radius could be anything, like we can have the 10 pixels of the radius. And I think that's enough for that. Or we can have some margin as well. We can have the margin of around something like 10 pixels once again. So we have some stylings for the div, and this is not a CSS course in which we want to just explain everything with the CSS, because this course is basically only for the React. So let's move on to list item. You can see now inside the peoples, you can see now we have the name, the profession, and again the name and the profession, the name and the profession, name, profession, and name, profession, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now that we created a couple of components with the React, we created the component of a profile, we created the component of the list in which we rendered some list items. And now let's learn another core concept of the React, which is the props. So props are used to pass the data from parent to child component. So let's see, they are used for the one-way communication to a component, to any different components. So there is one-way communication. So any parent component sends some data in the form of props to a component which is rendered inside the return statement. So parent container, which is the parent component, sends the data in the form of props, and then the child component use that data via that props. So simple. So we send some data. It is like calling a function with some arguments. So again, the syntax is different. So it sends some data in the form of props, and then the child component use that data. Very simple. And again, let's see the syntax as well. So what could be the syntax? So suppose we have the component of user. We send the ID equals to 1. We can send the name equals to, that could be anything. We can send the email, that could be anything. So there should be equals to, I think, my mistake. So we can just send some data along with a component by passing their props here. Like that could be the ID, that could be the name, that could be email, that could be anything that we want to send. So let's see the example here. So if we just move on to the React official documentation, so let's see what React says about that. So again, learn the React describing the UI that could be passing props to a component, and from there you can see the props used to communicate with each other. You can see every parent can pass the prop with some information to the child components. You can see what can we do. We have the avatar here, and inside the avatar we have just profile component. We have the avatar. So what can we do? We can just send some data avatar. The person here, that could be name and the image ID. The size could be 100 pixels. And from there we can just extract some data like this. We have the person, then we have the size. So let me just simplify everything for you. So let's just move on to the app component. Let's just remove this list for now. Let's just comment this and let's use the profile component. That could be the profile over there. So I think the profile component is already there, right? Why it's not coming inside the auto completion, right? It's okay now. You can see now we have the profile component. So if we just move on, you can see now inside the profile component, we have the name, we have the email, we have the phone, and this is static data inside any component. You can say inside the profile, we have some state of a component. So state represents the current condition of a data of a component. The current data for a component is a state. That's it. So inside the profile component, the state is static. We have the name equals to Nikhil, the email equals to this, the phone equals to this. So what if the parent component fetches some data from an API or just have some data from global state and sends the data to the profile component, and the profile component has to use that thing, right? So again, if I show you an example, we already did that. You can say inside the list component, we have the peoples.map. For every list item, we passed some element, which is the prop. We passed some data in the form of props. We have the item.name, item.profession. So we need to do same thing for the profile as well. Suppose we want to render the dynamic data. So that data can be inside the parent component that could be shown inside the profile. So inside the profile, inside the React, there is always a thing called props inside any functional component. So here inside the function, so inside the component, there is one argument which is the props. So props is the object containing all of the data that the parent component sends to the profile. So suppose inside the profile, if I send the name equals to, we can send the Nikhil over there like this. We have the Nikhil and we have the email like this. That should be, we can have an email as well. So that could be email like Nikhil Tadani official@gmail.com, like that. And then if I send the phone number as well, once again the phone, that could be a string once again. We have +91 987654321, like this. So we have this phone number over there. So you can see now we have some data for the profile component. We are sending some state to the profile, the name, email, and the phone, and now we should use that. But how we can use that? So if we just log the value of the props that we are getting, console.log, that could be the props that we are getting from the parent app component. The app is a parent because it is rendering the profile. So let me just move on to the application. Let me just move on to the inspect panel inside the console window. You can see if I move on to the information, you can see if I refresh, I'm seeing an object over there. You can see I'm seeing an object, and inside the object, we have the email, the name, and we have the phone. So by default, the React renders the component 2 times inside the development. So that's why you are seeing this 2 times. So you can see we have the name equals to Nikhil, we have the email equals to this, the phone equals to this, but here it is the static data, but this is the props that we are sending from the app component. So now what we can use, so you can see if we just move on to the profile once again, let me close the list. If I just remove everything from there, and instead we have the name, we can use the props object dot, we can have the name. So props object, once again the props dot, we have the email over there like this. So you can see if we just save, there would be no any errors because we are just sharing the data, we are just sharing the same data over there. But another thing, if I just move on to the app component, so suppose if the state changes, so suppose if I add the Nikhil Tadani over there like that, Nikhil Tadani, if we just save, so you can see the name would be updated as per the new state of our component. And there you can see the email. If I just add the Nikhil Tadani just @gmail.com, you can see now it would be instantly updated because now the profile component is using the props from the parent. You can see we have the phone number, it would be the same. And another thing that now you have the knowledge of how we can pass the data to the props. So I will give you an assignment. So do the same for the list, right? Do the same for the list. You can uncomment that and you can just pass the people's data to the list component. So let's get to that. So were you successful? So let us try it once again. So let's move on to the list component. So we have the people's data. We can just carry out this people's data into the app component. So here we have the people's data, and I'm just moving this people's data outside of the component because it is just the static data that we don't need to use it anymore. We just need to pass some data and it does not need to be updated again. So after the list, we can remove the list from there. We can just accept the props over there like that. We have the props over there, and after that we can have the props dot, we can have props dot, we can have the peoples dot map, and after that let's move on. So inside this list component we can have your something like, we can just move on, we can give anything like we use the people. So we have the peoples, that could be this value, this array. We have the peoples equals to this people array like that, people array, and we should use the same naming convention, the same name. We have the people, I think the people doesn't contain the s, right? Yeah, my mistake again. So let's move on. So it should be only the people. So you can see inside the list we are sending the people. It should be the same that we are accepting inside the props. It should be same, or else it would not work because the properties of the props would not match. So let's move on. So inside the app.jsx we are just sending the people over there, and let's move on. Let's just again check. You can see everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And if we just remove a couple of values from the people, like if I just remove first 3 items, so let's check if everything works fine or not. You can see now we only have the last element, that is this profile, the name and the profession. So that's how we can use the props within that. So everything seems to be working fine. So another thing that I want to show you. So you can see inside the profile, if we just open any component which has the props, suppose the profile. So here we have the props. So we already know that what type of data is there inside the props. So we can also destructure that. So we have the name, email and the phone. So we can also destructure all of the data there as well. So either you can just move on, you can have the const, you can have destructuring of the props like this. So you can have the name, email, that could be, we can have the phone as well like this. So you can just destructure this data and you can remove that like this. You can remove the props over there. So now we have the name, email and the phone, and everything should work perfectly fine. You can see now we don't have any issue. The data is rightly visible, and you can see even we have the destructuring of that. We can also do the destructuring at the top level as well. So what we can do, so we can just destructure all of the props there only. We can have here the name, email, then we can have the phone like that. We can do the destructuring at the top level, so it would work perfectly fine. Even if we again refresh, so you can see it is working perfectly fine. And one advantage for that, you can see inside the JavaScript, if you remove the props from there, and then you can see if you press Ctrl and space on your keyboard, you will see the VS Code IntelliSense providing you the details of what are the props that are accepted. That could be the email. You can provide the email like any @ we have the test.com like that, and we can just move on. So now we can move on, and again we can move on. We can have the name, that could be, we can have any, then we can have the phone, that could be, again we can have anything like that. So let's move on. So let's see what happens. So here you can see now we have the email, we have the phone, name, any, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now let's see another concept with the props, which are the children. So suppose if we want to send some JSX data as props, so how we can send that? So either we can again use a variable to send that, but that would not be a good approach. So if we need to send some JSX data to the children, which needs to be rendered on the web page, so we can use the props property, which is the children. So if we need to pass a component as props to another component, so see again the components as props to another component, then we can use the children property inside the props. So a component can send some JSX data as props, and the children can use that JSX data. And we can have a layout type structure with that. Like you can say there could be a children or there could be a parent, and that parent is using some data that needs to be rendered between them, and they can render that. That's it. So let's see that example. So there you can see, suppose there's a child component that we are rendering, and again we have the child component that we are rendering. So inside the child component, you can see there is some JSX data. You can see we haven't used the self-closing tag, but we have used a normal div between them. Like how we use inside the divs or the HTML elements, we are rendering something between them. So that's how you can see whatever the data that we are sending between them considered as a children property inside the props. So we can just directly get these children's inside the props. So let's see how we can implement that. So initially it will sound a bit confusing, but after you implement that, it would be very easy concept you will learn. So let's move on. So here we have the app.jsx, and here what do we want to do? So here I'm gonna create a new component over there. Like we can have again like the children like that. We have the children dot, we have the JSX like that. And here again we can define the function. We have the function children like that. You can also use ES5 syntax, but it is as per you. Like after that, we can just have the export over there, the default of the children, and we can return some JSX between them like this. So these are the empty tags that we discussed. So here we have the export default function of the children like that. And you can see we have the children component. So suppose we render the children between them inside this div. So we render the children like that. So you can see it will work perfectly fine. So if we run the development server, the npm, we can have the run, we can have the dev like this. So it's gonna work perfectly fine. So if we open that over there, so there you can see it is working perfectly fine. And even if we render something inside that, or we render here the div, we can have the high like that. You can see now we'll be seeing the high over there. So it is working perfectly fine. But there you can see, suppose if we want to send some JSX data between them, we can just use this children as a parent component. So this children can be considered as the parent. And you can see between them, we can send any data, like we can send the div, like I am a nested child like that. We have the I am a nested child like that. So we can send them. But there you can see now we haven't used this self-closing tag, but here we have used this children as a wrapper. And inside that we are rendering some div. And now you can see if we refresh, now we won't be seeing any changes. So now we won't be seeing any changes, because if we move on to the children, so there you can see what we are doing. So we are just rendering the high. So if you want to use this data, now if you want to use this data, we can again grab a property children inside this. So we get the property of the children. So it is by default added. So we don't need to add that. We don't need to send the children over there. So it is by default added inside that. And after that, if we want to render some children inside that, so we can just use the children like that. And after that, you can see now it will work perfectly fine. You can see now it is working perfectly fine over there. You can see I am a nested child. You can see again I am a nested child. So whatever the data that we change over there, like I am a nested child, or if we add here the h1 element over there, like we have I am children like that again. I am children, you can see again I am seeing that I am children over there. So everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So you can see this is amazing that we can send some data along with that as well without props. And if you want to send the JSX without the props, it would be amazing for that. And there you can see this children is the actual component of this div. So this div is this children again. So I'll mention again that this children is this div, that whatever data that we are sending is being rendered here. So if we change the styles of a parent component, suppose we have the style, we have the background over there, that could be, suppose we have the background, that could be, we can have here something, right? We can have the red as well, background and the red, and we can add the padding as well like that. Padding, that could be 10 pixels. You can say if we move on, so there you can see now we have I am children over there. But there you can see if we have some styles inside this, like we can have this style, and again we can have the background over there. Background, that could be, we can have the green over there. So there you can see how it's gonna work. So you can see first there would be the red background, because here this was, you can see this div that we have was a parent and this is a child for that. So that's why we are seeing the background of the green over there, and then inside the parent we have the background of the red. So that's how it's gonna work. So we can use these components as a wrapper as well. So we can use that as a wrapper. So if you want to send, or if you want to render some children's between them, we can use this. And this is amazing. So that's what the props and the children's are inside the props property. So the next core concept of the React are the events. So what are the events? So I think you already know about the events as you are coming from the JavaScript. So events are used for the user interaction. So what to do when the user has interacted with your application? So what to do when, suppose the user clicked on a button, like if the user clicked on a button, you open some menu, you create an API request to any backend, you just move on, you just show a different screen to the user, you just navigate to a different route. So events are used for that, for handling the user interaction. So events are subscribed and they get fired when there is some specified users interaction available. So when you specify some interaction for the user, like suppose for a button, once you click on a button, that form should be submitted, the screen should be navigated to a different page or anything. So they are subscribed and they get fired. And mainly the events are used to update something on a component. So suppose you have a component, so once you click on a button, the menu should be visible, and once you again click on the button, the menu should again be invisible. So events can update anything onto the UI. And now let's see the syntax as well. So again, that would be very simple. So inside the syntax, you can see I have shown you the button. On the on click of that button, you have a callback function with the alert that could be the hi. So that's why you declare the event over there. So on the on click of the button, there should be alert pop up from the JavaScript window that should be the hi. So let's implement that onto our application. So let's move on to suppose the profile component, and inside there, let's just create a new component. Let's create a new component that could be events handler dot, we have the JSX like that. And let's move on to the app.jsx. Let's remove everything from there. Let's remove the people from there. Let's remove that. And let's just remove the profile and list both. So now inside the events handler.jsx, again, we can define a new function. We can define a component that could be, we can have the events handler like this. So that could be equals to an arrow function. And inside that we want to return something. So we can return, suppose a button, or suppose anything that we want to update. We can have the button, that could be, we can have the hi or anything. So if we just move on, we can render the events. So after the BR, we can render the event handler over there, events handler like this. I think the events handler should be imported again. We have the import, we can have the import events handler, and the name should not be conflicted from that handler like that. So that should be equals to, we can have from events handler like that. I think we haven't exported anything, so we need to export this as a default export, the events handler for that like this. And let's use that here. We have the events handler. Let's move on with the application. So here you can see now we have the button of the hi. So we can click on that button. You can see nothing happens. So what if we add the interactivity? And inside the buttons on click, we add something like we have the on click, and inside the on click, we can add a callback function like that. And that should be equals to, we have the console.log, or we can have the alert pop up like that. That could be the hi. So if we move on to the application, we have the click me. So once we click on a button, you can see now we have the alert window on the browser that says hi. So you can see that's how we have the events over there. And another thing to mention, so I think you already know about this, like why we haven't used the alert directly. We have used the callback function. So you already know about that, because if we just use the alert directly, so it will just immediately call the alert, because the on click would be registered, and inside the JSX you are not having any callback function, you are just declaring an alert. So inside the JSX you have the alert. So the component will first register the button element, then the on click behavior, and instead of defining a callback, it will just directly call the alert. And if we want to use that inside the onClick, we should also use inside the arrow function. So if we move on to the application, you can see if we just move on, if we again refresh, on the clicking of a button, we have the hi. And if we remove that callback, we will immediately see the alert onto the browser. If we refresh, you can see now we have the alert over there. Again, we have the alert hi over there, you can see. And now on clicking of that, it would not happen because we have already called the alert. So we are calling that directly in a JSX. So let's move on. Let's just again have a callback for that this should be called on the onClick. It should not be called immediately. So let's move on. So once we click on that, now it should be called. So that's how the events works inside the JavaScript, and we can use it for a button as well. We can use for a form as well. So we can have the form over there inside our application. The form can have the submit event as well. We can have the inputs over there like that. Suppose that could be the input. And inside the on submit, what we can do, we have the on submit event of the button like that, on submit like that, and that could be anything. Like we can just again have the alert window over there like that, could be we can have the hi as well. So that's how we can do all these things. So let's try it out again. So let's move on to the application. So there you can see now we have the input tag. If we enter anything and if we hit on enter, you can see now we again have the hi over there, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So that's all for the events. So let's move on to another core concept of the React, and very important concept of the React, which is the state. So what is the state? So let me get back to the application again. Let me show you something. So there you can see now we have the form, we have the on submit element over there. So you can see we have the input tag, but you can see we are not storing anything inside the input. So if we store anything inside the input, so how can we store that? So we can move on. We can just provide the on change event for the input, and we can update something. So we need some state, right? We need the state of a component that can represent the data. So without the state, the whole application of the React will be useless, because here we won't be having any interactivity. We'll just be serving the static content. So state will help us to modify the data of a component, to manage the data, to manage the state of a component. So let's move on. Let's just again learn that what is the state. Then we will get back to the practical steps. So state represents the data in a component. So the data in a component can be represented via the state. So state can be anything. State can be anything like updating a button. Once we click on a button, we should update something inside the UI. That could be the state, or anything with that. So state allows the components to manage and store the data that can change over time. So suppose you had the filter over there, so you have the list of the products, you have the filter. Once you apply those filters, so the data should be updated. So that's why we need the state. So state, you can assume that as a variable that can handle the data. And it is very crucial part of building the dynamic web applications, because the application should be changed instantly. So for example, if you see the Amazon, so once you buy, once you click on a product, buy, once you click on the buy button, so you can see the states get updated of your application. Then that product would be there inside your cart, then inside the payment and everything, because it is being handled via the state. So anything which needs some data is a state, and the components need state to show some data. So let me move on. So we have the usage. So we can use the state with some variables and with hooks. So hooks are the predefined features inside the React. So we can use this state with variables, but if we use the state with the hooks, React will identify the updation. So once we update some state, React will identify that and it will update the DOM directly. You don't need to manually update the DOM. So for using the state, we need to use the hooks, and the variables approach are not the preferred way. Even it is not recommended by the React. So we should use the hooks, and the hook which we want to use for the state is a use state hook. So it was all theory, and I know it could be a bit complicated for you. So let's move on to the documentation of the React. So let's move on to the documentation again, learn React, adding the interactivity, and here we have a state, a memory of a component. So components often need to change what's on the screen. We already have discussed, like clicking next on an image, clicking buy or anything, the remember me or anything. So you can see how we can use the state. So when using a regular variable, it is not enough. You can say it is not enough. So you can see we already discussed that. So suppose we add the variable like the index. You can see we have the index equals to index plus 1 like this. We have this cluster list over there like this, anything. So on the H3, we can use some state over there. You can see the component renders is sculpture image. Clicking the next button should know the next image to be shown. So here is an example. You can see on clicking of that next, what we are seeing over there, we are just updating the index and the image should be updated, right? Once we click on the next, you can see the logic. We have the index equals to index plus 1 and we are just having the length of that image. You can say index plus 1 of this image. So let's move on. Let's just click on the next. You can see nothing happens because now the state was not updated inside the DOM. The normal variable state could not be updated directly. So if we just move on, you can see the handle click event handler is using updation logic to update a local variable, but two things to prevent that. Local variables do not persist between the renders. So we all know the rendering concept of the React and we will get to know about that in detail after some time. So when the React renders this component, when it displays this component second time, it renders from scratch. The changes to local variable would not trigger the re-renders. So you can say if we just click on the next, it is not updating. But what if we use a hook which is a use state? So use state is a hook inside the React that provides two things. The one is something a state variable, the variable of the state that we want to use, that could be anything. Then another thing, a function to update that state. So you can see adding a state variable, you import a hook from the React. So now you have the features of the React, you have the use state, and then you can see you just replace the let index equals to 0 with this, the const index set index equals to use state. So let's discuss that inside our application so that you will get to know more about this. So let's move on. Let's just create a new component that could be for state like this, the state example dot we have the JSX over there. And now let's just define a new component that could be we have the state example like that. So that could be equals to a function over there like this. It should return something like we have the div over there, and then it should be exported as a default export like this. We have the state example like that. So now you can see now we have the state example. Now we should use this instead of this. We have this state example over there. And now you can see inside that, if we open this state again, you can see what if we define a variable like we have the let, suppose the count over there equals to we have the 0, right? We have the count equals to 0, and suppose inside the div we need to show the count. So we can again have the paragraph for that. We have the count, that should be we can have the count like this. We have the count, and again after this we have a button. We can have the increment like that, increment, and on click of that button, what we can do on click over there, we can just define the on click logic here inside this on click event handler as well. Even we can define a new function to handle that event. So suppose if we do it here, like we have the arrow function and we have the count plus equals to 1, right? We are just incrementing the count variable. So let's see what happens if we move on to the application. So you can see initially we have the count of the 0. Once we click on the increment, nothing happens. Why? Even if we have updated that, because we haven't used the inbuilt feature of the React using the use state. And another thing to mention, if we just render here the log, that component re-rendered or regenerated. So if we just use the log, you can say initially the component has been rendered 2 times. So you can see initially the React renders the component 2 times. You can see the first time it renders the component, we have the count equals to 0, and second time we'll be having the count equals to 0. But once we click on the increment, now the component will not be re-rendered again because the DOM would not be updated. So if we need to update the DOM, we need to use something inside the React, which is a useState hook. So let's import something. We have the import something from that should be equals to, we have the React, and something that we want to import is useState. So it's a hook. So let's move on. So let's define the useState. So useState exactly returns 2 values. So let's get that. Const equals to, we have the useState. So it returns 2 values inside this array. So the first value always be a variable that we are declaring. That could be, we can have the count over there like that. We have the count, and the second variable could be the function which updates the first variable. So it would be the function that could be the set count like that. So the second item is a set count function which updates this variable count, and you can give it any name. So just to confirm that the second variable inside that will update the value of this variable. And inside the useState, you provide some initial data. You provide some initial data over there. That could be the 0 over there like that. That could be the 0, like initially the count would be 0. And after that, what you can do over there, so you can say you are already displaying the count, and you can see inside the onClick event what we can do. We can just use the set count over there. That could be, we can have 1 or anything like that. Suppose we define the set count of the 1. So let's see what happens. If we move on, if we just refresh, you can see, I think the log has been removed of the component was re-rendered. The log, that should be component, was re-rendered over there, the component over there like that. So let's move back again. Let's refresh. So the component was re-rendered. So once we click on the increment over there, you can see now the count has been increased, and there you can see now the component has been re-rendered. So with the help of useState, the component would again be re-rendered onto the DOM, and the state persists the component's memory. And when we change the variable or anything with the useState, it persists the component re-rendering. Right, so the memory would be dynamically updated, and we'll still be having the hold of this count variable, the updated variable of the count. And here, what if we want to dynamically update that, the count variable? So we need to use a callback function here. We need to use the callback function, and inside this set count, we need to use here the previous value of the count. So inside the set count, if you want to update something as per the previous state, as per the last state snapshot, we should use the previous value here. We'll get the previous value here. Then we can have the previous plus 1 like that. So this is a trick inside the set function, inside any set state function, in which in the callback, we always get the latest state snapshot. So that should be equals to the previous plus 1. It means it will always be incremented by 1. So let's move back again. Let's refresh. So the count is 0. Once we click on increment, now it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anything that you want to increment, so it would be incremented. So if we just talk about the set count, you can see we just saw it is working. But how? We already know that it is the latest state snapshot, the latest current state of your application. So what if we just use here a thing like inside the set count, or what if we have some function over there? So I'm declaring a function like const, we have the increment over there like this. So that could be equals to function like that. And inside that, we have this set count function over there like that. We have the set count, and that should be equals to, we have the increment over there like this. So on click, the increment would be called on the on click of that event. So what if we have the set count? That should be, we have the count plus 1, and again we call this set count plus 1, and again we are calling it 3 times. So this is very important to know. Note that. So if inside the increment we have the set count equals to count plus 1, and again the count plus 1. So what's gonna happen? So as per the code structure, once we click on the on click, So it should update the count 3 times. Set count, count plus 1, again the count plus 1, again the updated count plus 1. So let's see what happens inside this application. So once we click on the increment, you can see something weird happen, right? Because now you can see now we have just updated the count value 3 times, but it was only being reflected 1 time. Do you know why? So it is happening because React schedules the state updates, right? So it does not immediately update the state. Instead, it schedules the state updates, and state updates are asynchronous in behavior. So they are not synchronous, so they are always asynchronous. So it schedules the state updates inside the batches. So there are some batches for the state updates, and a copy is shared inside the batch. So it is very important to know because this is very important topic when building the React applications. So it does not immediately update the state. Instead, it schedules the state updates. So let's get back to the application. So there you can see once we click on that button, the increment would be called. And after the increment would be called, you can see we have the set count equals to count plus 1. So we have scheduled this, right? We have scheduled. And again, we have scheduled this as well, the count plus 1. And inside this schedule, the count was 0. Like that. So suppose we are just starting from scratch once again. Once we schedule this, schedule at the count was 0. We have scheduled at the count was 0. And again, it was again scheduled. If I will now just copy that, paste that over there. And what would be the value of count again? Please tell me, what would be the value? So once it will schedule this update, and again it schedules this as well, right? So again the count would be 0, right? The count would be 0 because it has not updated it yet. It has not updated it yet. The count would be the 0. And again, if the React moves on to the third line, so again the set state, the set count was scheduled at the count was 0. Because the React schedules the state updates, it does not immediately updates the state, right? So that's why this is happening. So if we again move on to the application, again see the problem if you didn't understand. If you click on increment, you can see we are just incrementing 1 time, even we have used it 3 times. Because once it schedules this count, the copy was shared as the count equals to 0 plus 1. And again the count 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1. So that's why you cannot see the updated value every time inside the next behavior. So this is not a problem. So yeah, this is not a problem. So this is the feature of the React. But if you want something, if you want to do multiple state updates inside one single function, though React doesn't recommend that, but if you still want to use that, what you can do? So you can have the set count over there, and inside the set count, there is a callback function. There is a callback function, and inside that, React guarantees that you have the previous state. So inside the callback, React guarantees that you have the previous state, and then if you have the previous state, that could be again the number, because you can see it is the number that you have defined. So that could be, we can have the previous plus 1, what we did earlier. So suppose if you do it 3 times, like set count, previous plus 1, previous plus 1, previous plus 1, and if we just comment that, so let's see what happens. If we move on to the application, if we refresh, so once we click on the increment, you can see now the count would be 3. So if I explain you again, so let's get these comments again. So we have, it was scheduled at the count was 0. So no, it was not scheduled at the count was 0 because here we haven't shared any count variable, right? There we shared the count variable, but here we don't have the count variable. We have the latest or the last state of the count scheduled at, we have the latest state, the last state of that, the last state value, like that. So it was scheduled at the last state value, and again it was scheduled at the last state value, and again this was also scheduled at the last state value for that. So now there's a huge difference between that. Here we were sharing one count variable for a copy for the batch update, and here we are dynamically sharing, so it will automatically pick up the last updated value. So once this function would be called inside the batch, then the state value would be already updated, and once the React will run this function, so the React value, the updated value, the previous value would also be updated, and same for this, the previous value would also be updated as 2, then 2 plus 1 equals to the 3. So this was a huge concept inside the React. So now I made it very simple for you, right? I made it very simple. Even I was very confused while learning this concept. So I think that's enough for the states for now. You can see that's enough for the states. So now you already know in depth about the states inside the React. So this was very important topic and we have covered it in very simplest way. So let's move on to the next core concept of the React, which are the hooks. So here we saw a hook, which is a use state. So you can see it was very helpful in updating the state variables inside our application. So now we need to move on, and now we need to see the more hooks that are very useful for building the React applications. And now we have some practical knowledge on the React. So we created a couple of components. We use the state, the props, and we use to manage with the events, to work with the JSX and the components. So now we have enough knowledge on the React. And there is a term which we used a couple of times before, which is the rendering. So what is this term? So let's discuss it. So rendering is a visual representation of a component. So how a component is being visualized to the end user is known as the rendering. And it is a complete process, so we will discuss it in a moment. And now let's move on. So it's a process of generating the visual representation of all components that are generated into the user interface. Now let's move on. So the rendering uses a concept called virtual DOM. So we already discussed the virtual DOM inside the React introduction menu. So let's again discuss that in depth. So what is the virtual DOM? So virtual DOM is the copy of real DOM. So it's a lightweight copy of a real DOM which is managed by the React internally to identify the updates. So virtual DOM helps us to update only those areas where the state has been updated and there needs to be some change in the UI. So virtual DOM updates the component to optimize the state updates and the performance, and it only updates only those components where the state has been changed and where that UI needs to be updated to visualize it to the user. So that is the virtual DOM. So both uses an internal algorithm to update the state. So it's not the virtual DOM alone which updates the state. So there is some internal algorithm which we will discuss in a moment. So there's another concept called reconciliation. So React uses a process called reconciliation to compare the new virtual DOM tree with the previous one. So it's the algorithm for changing the DOM. So it compares the new virtual DOM tree with the previous one and updates that state. So that is the process called reconciliation which the virtual DOM uses. So I know it will look complicated. So now we will see a diagram. So now we'll see a diagram and I will visualize it everything and you will get to know everything about that in depth. So let's move on to the diagram. So here we have a diagram. So once we write some JSX code, so once we write a component, we have the JSX code inside that. So we have the divs over there, like we can have any content after that. So once we write this code over there, then a virtual representation is being created. So there's a virtual representation is being created. It is a new virtual DOM copy. So it is being created after that in the form of UI, in the form of valid DOM tree. And then we have a new virtual DOM after the component is updated. And then the process moves on to the concept of reconciliation, which we have discussed, like it compares the old virtual DOM with the latest virtual DOM. So that's the process of rendering. So once we write the JSX, the new virtual DOM copy is being created in the form of virtual representation. Then the reconciliation uses its algorithm to compare those DOMs over there to compare the old virtual DOM with the new virtual DOM, and it updates the UI. So it identifies the differences and updates only those areas where the state needs to be updated. So this all process is known as the rendering. So this process is known as the rendering of the component. So that's the process of how a component or the UI is being visualized to the end user. And now let's get ready for an example project. So now we already know about the state and we have used the handling of the state. We use the count variable, but that was very basic state handling. And now in this chapter, we will see an example project with handling the form. So it's a real world project because inside any web application, there are the forms. So let's create a form and handle the data of the inputs of the form, and then we can log the data on the submit. So let's dive into it. So here I'm back again with the Visual Studio Code. And now what I will do here, so I will now just create a new component. That could be, we can have the form dot, we can have the JSX. So here we have the form.jsx component, and here what we will do is I will now just create another component. We can have the form. So that should be equals to, we can have a functional component, and then here we'll be having the return. We can have any div, then we can have the form like that. So we have the form, and after that we need to just export this component as a default export. We have the export default of the form. So with that you can see we created a form component, and there you can see this is a boilerplate code for any component, right? So this is a boilerplate for any component. So here inside the Visual Studio Code, we have an extension that we can use, which is ES7, React, Redux, React Native snippets. So with the help of this, what we can do, we can remove this, and then we can just type RFCE. We have the RFCE, and with the help of this, you can see we got this boilerplate code ready. So that's a magic, right? We got the boilerplate code ready with that. And here you can see RAFCE. With the RAFCE, here we have the functional component, we have the import React from the React, and then we have the form, we have the export default form, right? So this is very helpful in developing the React applications. So I suggest this extension for that, because it will really help you in developing the React applications easier. So let's remove this import React because we already have imported inside the main component. And after that, here we have this form. And now we need to render this form inside the app component. So let's move on to the app component, and there let's just remove this everything. Like we can remove this everything. We can have the H1, we can have the form handling like this, sound handling example like that. We have the form handling example, and the code of this example will also be shared to the GitHub. You can download it anytime. And after that, after the form handling, after this we can have another div, and inside that we can just provide a class name of the CSS. So inside the class name we can have some layout like this. We can have the layout, and after that let's move on to the app.css. Let's just add the layout as well. We can have the layout over there. So that would be a basic example, because here we have a div, we are providing a CSS class name of the layout, and we'll give some design. So we can have the margin, that should be, we can have the auto, we have the margin of the auto, we can have the width, that should be, we can have the 100% of the overall screen. And then what we can use, so we can just have a little bit of some border. So we can have the border over there, we can have the border of around 1 pixels solid, then we can have hash around CCC of there. It's just a shadow. And after that, what we can have, we can have the border radius as well. So that will be somewhere around 10 pixels with the CSS. And let's use that here. So we have the div class name of the layout, and inside that layout we'll be rendering here a form component. Here we have a form component, we need to render this component over there. And now I think it is very clear to you, because we just created a div, we have the CSS class, we have the form, and we are rendering the form component. That's it. And now let's move on to the form. So here we have the form component. So before moving ahead, let's open a terminal once again. So we can have the cd into the folder directory, then we can have the npm run dev to open the development server of our React application. So let's move on to the 5173 over there. So here you can see now we have the form handling example, and here we have this form, right? We have this form over there, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And I think the color is not matching. We can give a little bit of black color only. And after that, we can have some padding as well. We can give the padding of 10 pixels from all of the sides. So if we refresh, so there should be some padding as well. I think it's not there. So we have div class name of the layout, and because you can see we got the error because we haven't imported the app.css file. So we need to import that. So we can have the import, we can have this CSS file, we can have we can have the app.css, and with this now our CSS file would be imported, and now all of the styles would be applied. So there you can see now we have the form, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine over there. And with that we can remove the padding as well. We can remove the padding from 10 pixels, and what we can use. So if we just move on, so here we have the form component, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So now here we want to create a couple of input fields. So like suppose we are creating a form for adding a product. So we need to create those fields here. So what we can do, so instead of the div we can have a section, because the form is a section. You can use div as well, so they are just as the name suggests, like section or divs or anything. So here what we can do, so inside this section we can have another div tag over there. We have the div, and inside this div what we can use, so inside this div we can have a couple of input tags. So we can have the input, like input that should be for type equals to text. Okay, the name we can define for, like we can have the title of the product, and then we don't need the ID. We can have the placeholder for that. Could be we can use a like title of the product, like that we have the title. And again we can move on, we can have a couple of fields, like we can have the title, and we can have again name that should be description, like that, the description over there. Then we have the placeholder of the description once again, so that should be the description. Again we can use the title description, then we should use one for the price as well. So type should be equals to, we can have the number over there, and here we have the name that should be, we can have the price, and here as well we would be using the price over there. And that's enough I think. Or we can also use a select box as well, or drop down. So for that we can have the select over there, like this. We can have this select, we can have the name of the select, could be we can have the quantity, like this. We have the quantity, we don't need the ID, and after that we can have a couple of values for that. So what we can do, so either we can declare an array, we can have the quantities for that. So let's do it, because we want a dynamic React application, nothing static would be there. So we can have the cons, we can have the quantities, so that should be equals to an array, and it should be equals to, we can have 0, we can have a string 0 to 100, and we can have the 100 to around 500, and then we can have around 500 to, we can have the 2000 something. So we can have the quantities for a specific product for an e-commerce application, and this is a static array. So we can move this array, below the form component as well, before the form component as well, because every time the React renders a component, so this would be regenerated. So everything would be regenerated, whether that's a function, whether that's a variable or anything. So they are regenerated on every render. Now we have the quantities. So here inside the select, what we can use, so we can have the expressions, we can have the quantities dot map, that should be equals to, we can have the item, like that. We can have the item, and that should be equals to what we can use. So here we can have the item. So inside the select we have an option, like that. We have the option or anything. So we have the value, or we have the option over there, right? We have the option, and after the option we can move on. We can have the option, then we can have the value, that should be equals to, we can have the index of the item, we can have the item. So I think we can have the quantities like index over there, like the item, like this. So that's how it's gonna work. And here we can just have the item itself. And again, for rendering so React needs a key for rendering the list. We can have the option, we can have the key, that would be equals to the item itself. For now it would be item itself. So let's see how it's gonna look. We have the title, description, the price, and we have some values over there. Right, so everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So here I think we can provide some styles for this div. We can have the class name, inputs over there, and we can have the inputs over there. We can move on to the CSS file. We can also create a new CSS file for this specific component. That could be form dot we have the CSS, and inside that we can have the inputs over there. We can have the display of the flex. We can have the flex direction. That should be, we can have the column. We can have the items. Sorry, we can have the I think we have the flex direction column. We can have the justify like this. So we can have the justify content. That should be inside the center. And that's enough, I think, for that. We have the margin of that should be, we can have the auto, so that it should be rendered inside the center. Then I think we can have some, that's enough, I think, or we can have the padding of around 5 pixels from all of the sides. So let's see how it's gonna look. So we have the inputs, and now to use the CSS, we need to import that as well. So we can move on to the top. We can have the import, something like we can have dot, we can have the form dot CSS. That's it. So here you can see now we have the title, description, the price, and we have the price tag over there. And after that we can have for each specific input as well. So what we can use, so we can directly use the input tag from the HTML directly. We can have the input tag over there. We can have the width. We can have the width of somewhere around, we have the 200 pixels. So let's see how it's going to look. We have the width of 200 pixels. That's how it's going to work. I think we can increase to 500 or something for now. We can just skip the responsiveness. We can have the 500 for the input, and we can have the border radius like this. We can have the 10 pixels over there. So now we have this inputs. Then we have the padding as well, somewhere around 20 pixels. Would be so much, but that's okay. Then we can have the margin from all of these sides. That should be 10 pixels for them. We have the margin of 10 pixels. We have the price tags over there. And then what we can use, so we can have the select as well. We can move on with this select. Here we have the select, and we need the same type of thing with the select as well. So we can just skip these stylings over there for now, and then we can just focus on the React functionalities. And after that, what we can use, so we can have a button as well in the end. So after the select, we can just have here the button in the end. So we can have the button over there like this. So here we have the button to submit the form data like that, to submit. And here you can see we haven't used the form. So here we need to use the form tag because we are declaring a form, and that's a good practice anytime. So here what we can do, so we can have the form over there, the form. We can skip the action for now. We can use the action in server components, but we can skip that for now. Then we have the form, then we have this input tags, and the button is taking a lot of space. So let's move on to the form.css. We can give the styles for the button. We can have the width. So the width of the button should be same, like we can have the 500 pixels. We can have the padding of around 5 pixels for the button. We can have the border radius as well. Border radius, that should be somewhere around 4 pixels for that. So here we have this button over there. You can see it's looking great. And once we click on the button, you can see the form is going to be submitted. So here you can see inside the URL, inside the browser, you can see the data is being reflected inside the URL. So now you can see now we have the title, description, price, and you can see we have the quantity, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So here now we want to handle the state. So now we want to handle the state of the forms. So if we write anything, if we click on this submit, then we want to get the data inside the console window so that we can send the data to the database or anywhere or any API. So let's move on. So here inside the form.jsx, I'm closing other files. So here you can see inside each input tag, we haven't stored anything. So these are the default inputs from the HTML. We haven't stored anything. So to store something, we again need a state. Like we did inside the state example, we have the count variable, and we already know that the use state just persists between the rendering. So every time we render the component, the state would be persisted until and unless we refresh the whole browser, right? So we can have the state. So first we can just use the basic example from them. We can have the const, we can have the title state. So we can have the use state. That should be equals to, we can have the use state over there. We can use the state. Then we can give initial value as the empty string. So here we would be getting the title over there like this. The title, we have the set title like that. So the title is the actual value. Set title will update that title. And we can use same for all other tags as well. Like we have the title, then we have the description as well. We have the description, Then we have the set description over there like this. We have the set description. Initial value would be empty string, right? And then we can move on. So we have the price as well. So we can have the price, and here as well we would be having the set price to set the updated value of price. And here again we have the quantity. So we can have the quantity over there like this, the quantity. Then again we can have the set quantity. And here you can see initial value would be, we can give the 0 option because now we have the indexes. So index 0 means 0 to 100, 1 means 1 to 100 to 500, 2 means 500 to 2000. So there you can see now we have these states. So we haven't used it anywhere. Now inside the React, we have the functionality, we have the props for the input. So inside the input, we have a prop of the value. So we can give the value prop to the input. We can have the value that should be equals to, we can have the title, right? So inside the input value equals to the title. So now this title is being assigned to this input value. We can move on. We can have the price as well. So here we have the price over there. So we can have the value that should be equals to, we can have the price. So now we have the price over there. Now we can move on. We can have the description as well. So we can have the input value equals to description, right? We have the input value equals to description for that. And the last thing that we have for the quantity, we can move on with this select. We can have the value over there that should be equals to, we can have the quantity. So you can see now we have assigned those values, but we are not updating them, right? Because you can see these functions are unused. So let's see inside the browser that what we can see if we refresh. So there you can see if you enter anything inside the title, enter anything, it won't be accepted, right? It would not be accepted even inside the price or anything, because now we have these values assigned to all of these input tags, the title, the price, the description, the quantity, right? So these are now, for now, the static values because we haven't updated any value. So that's why we are saying that we cannot change anything over there. Even if we select this, the values would be same. So now the next step would be, now we want to update those values, right? Now we cannot enter anything, we cannot use anything. Now we want to update those values over there. So let's use that. And I know the design looks very ugly, so we can just learn the React. We can work on design later inside our bigger projects, but as of now we can just move on with the React functionalities, that how we can handle the forms. And after that you can see we have the title, description, price, and this. And if we want to use these functions, that how we can use that. So inside the input we have a prop which is a onChange. So onChange is a prop inside the input which updates the state. Like once we enter anything inside the input, the onChange is going to be fired. So once any input value changes, the onChange is going to be fired. Then we can just get the updated event and their value, right? So inside the onChange, if we have the callback function over there, like this, we have the callback. So inside the callback, we get the event value. So this is a React.change event value of the input element. And from this, we can update the value. Because inside the JavaScript, we all know that we use the event.target.value to grab the value of an input. So we can use same because it's also the JavaScript. So what we can use, so we can have this set title like this, then it should be event.target. We can have the value. So let's see what happens. If we just move on to the title once again, if we just enter anything, you can see now the value is being changed every time. Right now the value is being changed every time. So you can see it is very good that now we can change the value of the input, and now this is being stored inside the title as well. So you can also log this. You can have the log that should be equals to, we can have the title. So we can have the title as well like this, title over there. So that should be equals to this title. So inside this, you can see now, if we again refresh, you can see now the title is blank as of now. If we enter anything, like I will add my name, like Nikhil, you can see, so the component is being re-rendered. So now the title value is Nikhil. On every input enter, the component is going to be re-rendered and the state would be updated. So that's how we can just handle the values. So you can see inside the title, now we have the Nikhil. We can use same for all other fields as well. Like for the description, we can have the on change over there like this, the on change, a callback function. We can have the set description, and that could be, we can grab the event and we can get the value from that event. Event.target. We can have the value. We can use same for this input as well. We can have for this price as well. We have the set, we can have the price, event.target.value again, and same for the select as well. We can have the on change as well. On change, we can get the event, then we can get the event. We can have the set. I think we have the quantity. We have the set quantity, event.target. We can have the value, because here we have the value inside the numbers. So let's see what happens. So if we enter anything inside the description, so it is going to be saved. Inside the price as well, it is going to be saved. Inside this as well, it is going to be saved. So now we can change the value. So now what we want to do is, now we can just remove this log title. We can also refactor some code later. And after that, you can see now we have the button for this submit. And now what we can use, so inside the form as well, inside the form tag, we have a prop of the on submit. So when the form would be submitted, so this submit would be called, this on submit would be called. And here what we can do, we can just grab the data, we can just log the data, right? So what we can use here, we can just have a separate function to handle the form submit event. So we can have the handle submit over there like this. So that should be equals to handle submit. And here we can get the event value, because here also we'll be getting the event. So we need to grab that event value as well. So inside the on submit, we can have the handle submit over there. We have the handle submit. So now inside this, so if we just log anything, like we can have the hi over there. So once we submit the form, we would be seeing the hi. But here you can see this is some weird behavior. So once we click on the submit, so the form is going to be submitted and the page would be reloaded. So that's the default behavior of the JavaScript. Right, so once we click on the submit, once we click on submit, the form data is going to be sent into the URL and all. So this is the default behavior. So now we want to prevent that behavior. We can also prevent that behavior. We can use that. So we can have the event, or we can have the prevent. So we can have the event.prevent default. So with the help of this, the browser will not be reloaded. So if we do it once again, if we just move on with the form, so you can see once we hit submit, every time, you can see the form is not going to reload the page. And after that, let's move on. Let's just log the values of the inputs as well. We can have the title like this. So we have the title over there. We can use for the description as well like this. We have the description, the price, the quantity, and that's it. I think like we have 4 states. So you can see now we have the title, description, price, and quantity. So let's save everything. Let's just use the title. Could be, we can have a monitor, around, we can have the 4K monitor like this. We have the description like Dell 4K monitor like this, Dell 4K monitor. The price could be, we can have around $500. Then we can have quantity of around 100 to 500 units inside our stock. So let's remove everything and let's just click on the submit. So there you can see, now we have the data. We have the 4K monitor, Dell 4K monitor, the description, the price is 500. Then with the quantity that we have is 100 to 500. So that's how we can work with that. You can see it seems very good over there. So that's how we can use all of these things with the React. We can update the states. So this is the real world example. So just don't focus on the design, focus on what you have learned throughout this example. You have learned how to handle the forms with the React, and this is a very important concept in React or inside any JavaScript or web application, because form handling is a crucial part. So here we can also refactor this code after that. So let's start with the refactoring. You can see we have used the title, we have used the use state for a title, a separate use state for title, separate use state for price, same for description and quantity. So now we can just improve that, because now if we define the arrays, so we can also use the arrays, we can also use here the object. So here we can have the object, we can have the map of the object in which we can have different value for the title, different value for the price, same for the description, same for the quantity. So I will show you that how we can use that. So let's remove everything. And after that, let's declare one use state that should be equals to, we have the use state over there, that should be anything. So here it should be all of those inputs, and we have the set inputs like this. We have the set inputs, and inside the use state we can give an object. So inside the object we can provide the initial values. Inside the object we can have for the title, that should be empty string. We can have the description over there, that should be again be empty string. Then we can have the quantity, that should again be an empty string. Then we can move on. Then we can have the price as well, right? We have the price, that should again be the empty string. So here you can see, if you hover over the inputs, now you have the object of the inputs, right? Now you have given an object instead of the string value. We have the object, we can use any value inside the object. So that's why we can take care of and we can use that. And after that, we can remove this lock for now. We can just wrap up this function. And now what I'm gonna do, so here we have the inputs. So now we want to update those values as well, like value equals to title. Now it should be the inputs object. We have the inputs object dot, we have the title. You can see the VS Code IntelliSense also showed that. Same we want to use with this as well for the description, the inputs dot description. Same we want to use with the price. Same we want to use for this as well, the inputs dot quantity. But here you can see now these functions are not available. These state updation functions are not available. The set quantity, set price, set description, set title. So here, what if we only have one function? Like now we have the one functions. So now we want to update only this function. And how we can do that? Because this function contains all of these values to be updated. And how we can do that? Very simple. You can see inside each input we have provided a unique identifier name, right? Input name equals to title, name equals to description, name equals to price, and name equals to the quantity. So we can use the unique identifier and we can just add those values on that conditions. So here I will give you a very dynamic approach to handle the inputs. So you only need one function for all of the inputs to change their values. Right, we can use only one function to handle all of those input values. So I'm gonna show you how, and I will explain each and every step once again. So we can have the const, we can have the handle change like that. We have the handle change, and that should be equals to a function like that. So that would be equals to a function, and we will grab the event over there. And after that, now what we wanna do, inside each onChange function, now we wanna give that handle change. So we have the onChange over there, we have the onChange, so we can just have the handle change over there, and now the handle change will be getting the event. Right, we can use same, we can do for this as well, for this as well, and for this as well, like this. We have the onChange equals to handle change, handle change, handle change, and handle change. So inside the JavaScript event, if you log the value of the event, if you just log the event, so you will see something. If you just enter anything, like anything over there, you can see now you got the event. Right, now you got the event, and inside the event, you can see you got the target value. Right, you got the target value. You can see you have the target value. Once you open the target value, you have the actual value. Right, now you have the actual value as well. And now you can also grab the unique identifier for that, like just search for the name. We have the name of the title, right? So now it would be very easy for you to handle that. So we have just a simple condition, like we can have the set inputs, and again first we can grab the previous value like we did earlier. We just discussed in depth that how this previous works. So we have the previous value, that should be equals to a new object, and inside that you can have a property of event dot target dot name, and the value of that key should be event dot target dot, we can have the value. That's it. And you also need to use the previous state. So first you need to use the previous state like this. We have the previous, then you need to update those values like that. So that will all be for handling your all of those inputs. Because if I just comment it out, if I just log the event.target.name, there. So we have the log event.target.name, and if I log the value as well, event.target.value over there inside the log over there. So let's see what happens if we move on. If we just enter anything once again, you can see now we got the event.target.name of title. We have the target name of title. We have the value of s. Suppose we add anything over there, you can see this was the description and this was the a. So we are updating the objects of JavaScript with that. That's it. So if we just remove everything and if we just uncomment that, so everything is going to work perfectly fine. Now you can just enter any value to any of these inputs and they are going to be stored perfectly. So let's move on. And after the handle change, if inside the handle submit, again we can log something. We can have a log that we can just log the value of the inputs over there. So let's see what happens if we again have, suppose now we have different thing. We have the washing machine and we can have something here as well. We have the automatic washing machine from the Samsung over there, like this. We have the from Samsung. Then we can have the quantity. We have the price of around, we can give around $1,000. Then we can move on. So we can have, I think we can have the quantity of around 0 to 100. So let's see what if we submit the data. So once we submit, you can see now we got the title, washing machine, we got the quantity, we got the price, we got the description. So you can see that's how we can also refactor the code and we can have a dynamic form handling concept with the React. So with the help of this, now you might have a good understanding of how we can handle the forms, and you can also think of a more better way that how you can handle the forms with the React. So with this step, now we can wrap up this example, and now we can move on to the next core concept of the React, which are the hooks to learn. So let's wrap up this, and I hope you have learned a lot from this example. So let's wrap up. So now let's move on to the next core concept of the React, which are the hooks. So what are the hooks? So hooks are special functions that can help manage the state and components efficiently. So there are special features of the React in which we have the hooks. So hooks helps us to manage the components according to our requirements. So these are the functions that helps us use the React features for handling the state and components and their life cycle. So they were introduced in the React 16.8. So prior to React 16.8, there were the class components. So everyone was using the class components, but after the introduction of hooks in React 16.8, the whole community has been moved from class components to functional components, which also helps us to use some of the lifecycle methods which were there in class components. So for now, almost no one uses the class components because now we have the hooks. And hooks also helps us to use some of the lifecycle methods, which we will discuss in a moment. And they helps in reusability, avoiding the classes, and with the easier code generation. So now we have functional components and they are quite easy to use. So that's why we have easier code generation, and it helps us to build the reusability as well. So hooks are both predefined and they can be created according to the requirement. So you can use the React hooks as well, which are predefined, and you can also create a customized hook according to your requirement, and it is super simple to do that. So now we have the knowledge on the hooks. Now we have little bit knowledge on the hooks. So now let's move on and let's just see the hooks one by one. So the first hook that we have is the use state hook, right? We have already used the use state, right? For managing the data, for managing the variables inside a component. So use state allows the functional components to use the state variables. So we have already discussed about the use state hook in depth, and we have showed you how we can update the state and all with that. So if you still want to understand that, you can just move back to that timestamp and you can rewatch them again. And now let's move on to the second hook, which is very important, is the useEffect. So what is this hook? So let's discuss about that. So useEffect hook enables performing the side effects inside the components. So what do I mean with side effects? So side effects refer to the operations that are not directly related to rendering components, but they are necessary for functionalities that could be like data fetching from any source, that could be the subscription for any events, or manually changing the properties or the DOM. So they help us manage the side effects inside the components. And with the help of useEffect, you can also use some of the lifecycle methods that were introduced in class components. So now after this useEffect, we will discuss the lifecycle methods as well. So it helps us run the side effects inside the React application, and that is the syntax. So here we have the syntax of the useEffect, and it is very important hook when learning with the React because it helps us manage the side effects, and there are a lot more operations which we will see in a moment. So here we have the useEffect hook, and inside that we have a callback function which runs a part of code. So inside this callback function, whatever we run gets executed after the component is being rendered. So useEffect runs only after the component is being rendered onto the DOM. So then after that, the useEffect runs once. And after that, you can see we have a callback function. So once suppose a component is being rendered, then the useEffect would be ran. And then inside the second parameters, we have an array. So what does this array means? So whatever values do we provide inside an array? So if any value changes, suppose there is a count variable inside that useEffect. So if the count changes, so useEffect will rerun once again. So if any value changes inside the dependencies array, so this is known as the dependencies array. So if any value changes inside this array, so the useEffect will again rerun. So that's why we have the useEffect hook inside the React, and it is very helpful in creating React applications. So let's move on to the React's official documentation and let's learn about the useEffect. So it's a React hook that lets you synchronize a component with an external system. So we will let you know about this statement. So this statement is slightly advanced. So right now we are beginners, so we will let you know about that. So here we have the useEffect, and inside there we have the setup, and here we have the dependencies array. So that could be an array of dependencies. After that, so we have this. So suppose there is a chat room, and here we have the room ID inside a component, inside a chat room. So here we run the useEffect. We don't declare a variable for the useEffect, we run it directly. So here we have the useEffect, and there could be, we can have the const any connection, which can create a new connection to any server, to any socket or anything. And after that we can return something, and there is a dependency array. So if any value changes inside this room ID or the server URL, the useEffect would rerun. So these are the features of the useEffect. If you wanna move on with the React.dev, you can learn from there as well again. So now let's move on and let's just discuss the useEffect practically. So here I'm creating a new file with the useEffect. So let's declare that we have the useEffect example dot we have the JSX, and here we can again run the RAFCE which I showed you earlier. Then we can move on, we can remove the React import, and we can again move on to the main file, the app.jsx, and we can just move on, we can remove that layout, and here we can also remove this, the form handling example. We can also use here directly the useEffect like that. We have the useEffect, and here we can run, and there we would be running the useEffect component. We have the useEffect example, so let's run that. And again, let's open the terminal and let's move on. We can run the npm run dev. So let's see how it looks once again. So there would be the useEffect here inside that. So we have the useEffect example. So let's move on. So let's move on to the useEffect example. So here, what we can do, we can first close that and that as well. So inside this, we can run a useEffect. For that, we need to import the useEffect from the React. So we can have the import, we can have the useEffect from that should be equals to from the React, and we need to import the useEffect like this. We have the useEffect hook, and here what do we want to do? So we can just directly run the useEffect. We don't need to use a variable, we can just directly run that, and there we have a callback function which is a side effect. So we can have a callback function like that. So that is the function. So this function gets executed when the component renders. So after the component has been rendered once, then the useEffect would be called. And inside this second parameter, we define the array. So there would be an array of dependencies. So if we have any array of dependencies, so if any value changes inside that, so useEffect will rerun. So we will discuss all that one by one. So let's move on and let's just see the effect example. So after the useEffect, I'm just writing here the log statement that would be like a rendered component like that. We have the rendered component, and after that, let's move on to the useEffect. And here, let's move on. Let's add a log statement that could be we have the use effect, we have the ran, we have the useEffect ran like that. So let's move on to the application once again. So here we have the useEffect example. Let's move on to the inspect panel. So let's again refresh. So you can see first the component would be rendered, then the useEffect would be running again. So here you can see useEffect ran 2 times. So one thing to note that during the development, the useEffect runs 2 times. And because of this, so if we move on to the main.jsx, so here we are using the React strict mode. So React strict mode allows us to have a cleaner development experience in which if we get any error throughout the component, so it displays the errors, and it have many features like exploring the bugs from our code, exploring the security issues, vulnerabilities, etc. If we remove that strict mode from here, if we remove that, we just need to render the app component, so then it would be perfectly fine. So if we again refresh this, you can see now we only see the useEffect ran 1 time, because only during the development the strict mode runs the effect or renders the component 2 times. So you can see now if we refresh again, you can see now we have now the component would be rendered and would be added to DOM, then only the useEffect would be ran once. So that's the behavior of the useEffect. So that's one thing about that. And now let's move on to the second thing. So we have discussed about the array of dependencies, right? So let's declare a state variable. So let's declare a state variable which can be a use state. So we can have the const, we can have something that should be the use state over there like that. We have the use state, and inside that we can give a default value of the 0. Then we can again use a count once again, and we can have the set count like that. And after that, inside this we can again have the count over there like that. First we can again have the effect like that. Then we can move on, we can have another div here that could be, we can move on, we can have the count is, that should be, we can have the count over there like that. We have the count, and here we can again have the button, and with the on click of that button like that, we have the on click, and inside the on click we can move on and we can have the set count. That should be, we have the previous, again we have the previous value, we already discussed that. It would be the latest state snapshot, the previous, then it would be the previous plus 1. So we are returning the previous plus 1 value, and here we can have the increment like that. And you can see we have this count variable. So if we move on to the application once again, so you can see once we click on the increment, you can see it is working perfectly fine, and the component is already being rendered again and again, right? But you can see if we just hit on increment, the useEffect just ran once after the component was rendered. So if we just change the value of the increment, so useEffect will not rerun again, right? So whenever we hit on the increment, it will only run once. So let's move on to the example once again. So here we have the useEffect example, but if we add the count variable here like that, you can see we have the count. So every time the count changes, the useEffect will rerun. So let's discuss it again. So if we refresh it once again, you can see we have the rendered component and we have the useEffect ran. So once I will hit on increment, you can see again now we got the useEffect ran. So now you got the things right. So if we add anything for which the value can be changed, like suppose the count, so whenever the count's value changes, the useEffect will again rerun. So the code inside that will again rerun. And the real world example of the use effect could be we can fetch the data from any source, and once the data would be there, we can again grab that data and we can display the data from an API like that. So that could be an example from the use effect, which we will see in a moment. So that's how the use effect runs. So that's how we can use the use effect with the React. So use effect also offers us a new thing called cleanup function. So what is a cleanup function? So cleanup function helps us, like whenever the component would be unmounted, it means whenever the component would be removed from the DOM, every time if the state changes, if the component again reruns, so the cleanup function would be executed. So suppose we have a subscription. So you can see here we have a log statement of the re-rendered. So every time the count changes, every time the count variable changes, the whole component would be regenerated. So everything here inside this code would again be regenerated because state is changed inside this component. So then the cleanup function would be there. So cleanup would be used to clean up some subscriptions from the DOM, like if we have subscribed to any events or anything like that. So cleanup would be there to clean the things up, right? And how to write the cleanup function? We can again just have the return statement over there. We can have the return statement like that. We have a return, and that would be again a simple function. We just return a function over there. That could be our function, and this is a cleanup function. So that is a cleanup. And now we can just add a log statement over there. Like we can have the log, that should be a clean up over there like that. We have a cleanup. So if we again move on to the application, if we again refresh, you can see first we have the rendered the component, and again the use effect ran. So for now the component is not unmounted, right? So now the component is still in the virtual DOM. So once we hit on the increment, you can see first the component would again be re-rendered. So then the cleanup function would run because the component was re-rendered. So it was removed from the DOM. So then the cleanup ran, and then the use effect again ran. So you can see every time the increment would be created, every time we hit the increment, so everything inside this component would again be regenerated and reinserted to the DOM. So that's why we need the cleanup function, because we can just remove some pending subscriptions which are there, some pending API request. We can remove that from the DOM. Or if we have something subscribed, like if we have any event subscribe, so every time any state changes, so event would subscribe as many times as the state changes. So here inside the cleanup, we can move on and we can unsubscribe to any events which were registered. And this is very helpful in creating React applications. So now let's discuss about the lifecycle methods inside the React. So lifecycle methods were introduced in the React classes version where we use the class components, but now there is no need to use the lifecycle methods because now we have the use effect. But let's learn that what are the lifecycle methods. So lifecycle methods allows using the components lifecycle methods according to the project requirement. So they allows us use the component lifecycle, that how the component updates, when the component updates, and what should we do when the component updates, and what should we do when the component was added to the DOM or when the component was removed from the DOM. So we can manage all that according to the lifecycle methods. So earlier there were a couple of functions which we will discuss in a moment, but now with the help of useEffect, we can manage all that. So the first function that we had was component did mount. So that was a function with the class components. So this runs after the component is rendered to the DOM. Right, you can see with the help of useEffect, we have already achieved that. So once we run the useEffect over there, you can see if we don't add anything over there inside the dependency array, so the component did mount will automatically run with the useEffect. And we have another function of the component did update. So after any state updates inside the component, so it gets executed. So we already did that. We added the item inside the dependency array, which is the count. So whenever the count changes, the useEffect code will rerun. So we have already achieved that with the help of the useEffect. And there's another function with the lifecycle, which is the component will unmount. So this was the function which runs just before the component is removed from the DOM. So just before the component would be removed from the DOM, the component will unmount, gets executed. And we already did that with the cleanup function. So cleanup function also runs when the component is being unmounted from the browser, from the DOM. So you can see we have already achieved all of these lifecycle methods with the help of the useEffect. And with that due respect, the useEffect is perfect hook with the React, which can help us manage everything with the state. When was the component mounted, when anything updates, if we wanna suppose send a new message whenever anything is updated, if we wanna do something, clean up the subscriptions when the component was unmounted, and everything with that. So these were the lifecycle methods with the help of the useEffect. So now, guess what? Now we have an example, a real world example fetching the data from an API. So this is the example with the help of useState and useEffect hook. So here we need to fetch data from an API and render it as a list. So the steps are mentioned. So when the application loads, we need to send the HTTP request to an external API to get the data. Right, we can use the useEffect with that, right? And then we can store the data in a state variable and we can display that data. And another thing to mention, which is a bit advanced concept, is we want to display a loading bar until the data is fetched, right? So let's do that. So if you want to try it yourself, I would be very happy for that. But if you want again take some help from me, then let's do it once again. So for that example, let's again start from scratch. So here we again have a fresh React application and we have a new branch of the API example. So here we have the main file, we have the main.jsx, here we have index.css, here we have app.jsx, and here we have the app.css, which contains nothing, so we can remove that as well. And now let's move on and let's just create the API example. So here what I want to do, so here we have 3 steps. So when the application loads, we need to send the HTTP request to an API to get the data. So let's move on. So which API should we select? Because here we would be selecting the free API, so we need to select a free one. So here we have this API. So we can use the GitHub API. So what you need to do, so the URL for this API, it's a REST API. So the URL is api.github.com/users. So we can make the HTTP request to this API and then we would be getting an array of the users which we can display in our application. So let's move on. So here what do we want to do? So let's move on. Let's create a new file that could be, we can have a something like, we can have the users like that. We have the users dot, we can have the JSX, and here we can again have the RFCE, and here we have the users, and here inside the app.jsx we can move on and we can render the users. So here we have the users like that. So here the users would be rendered. And after that, what do you want to do? So if we move on to the application, so here if we refresh once again, I think we again need to restart the server. We have the npm run dev, and now the server would be restarted once again. So here we have the API example and everything is working perfectly fine. So here it is the API URL. So let's hit that API. So here first let's move on to the users, and here what do you want to do? So we can run a useEffect once again, because now we want to send the HTTP request when the application loads. So we can use the useEffect for that, right? We can use the useEffect, and here in this useEffect now we want to fetch the list of the users. But how we can make the HTTP request to that API? So we can use the JavaScript fetch method, right? We can use the JavaScript fetch to make the HTTP request. So if you're not familiar with the fetch, still it is very easy to use. We have the fetch, which is globally available inside the JavaScript, and inside the fetch, if we move on with the fetch, so here we want to provide the URL. So inside the fetch, we can provide a URL. So that is the URL. We can copy that and we can paste that inside this fetch function. We have the fetch inside the URL, and inside the second parameter, we need to provide here the method. So here the method of the HTTP request here is we have the get request. So method should be the get, and by default also the fetch uses the get method. So here we don't even need to specify that. So here we have the method of the get and we already know that. So after we fetch this API, then we would be getting some response as well because it's a promise. So for that, we can use a then statement, right? We can use a then statement, and inside the then, we would receive the response from this API. We can receive that response. And after that, what do we want to do? So we can convert the response to the JSON format. So that would be a response inside the HTTP format. We need to convert the response to the JSON. And after that only, now we can move on, and inside the next then statement, we can write a then statement once again, and inside then we would be getting the actual data, because now response would already be converted to the JSON. Then we can move on with the data, and then we would be getting the data from that API. And here we can have the console.log, that could be the data like that. And here we can also again use a catch block as well. If we get an error, then we would be just having the error as well. We can have the console.log, we can have the error received. We have the error received over there, and inside that we can just render the error as well. We can display the error. So let's move on to the application. Let's see what happens. So if we refresh, you can see inside the console window we have something. Right, so there. So now we have list of all of the users from an API. Right, so now we have the list of all of the users and it seems to be working perfectly fine. Now we have all of the data. Right, so this data is already there inside the console window. So that's the first step is completed. And now we want to move on to the next step is we want to store the data and we want to render as a list. So for storing the data, again, we can use the state. So we can have the use state over there once again. We can have the use state, and with the help of ES7 snippets, we have the snippet of the use state as well. And once you hit on that, so there you can see the boilerplate code is already generated. So we can use that. So here inside this, we can have the users like that. We have the users, then we can have the set users over there. So that should be the set users. And by default, it would be an empty array, right? Because the users is an array. So by default, it would be an empty array over there. So let's move on. So we have the users, and inside that as well, we can have the users list. But let's save the data once again. So here we have the set data, and here what we can do. So we can have the set users, that would be the data, right? Because the data is an array for now, so set users would be the data. And after that, let's move on. Let's just log the value of the users that we have. So now we are only just logging the value of the users, not the response. So again, you can see users.jsx11, we have the users data, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine once again. And now we want to move on, and now what we can do, we can just render the list of the users. So we can have the section tag from the HTML, and here what we can do, we can just render the list of the users. So we can again use the expressions, and here we can have the users like that. We have the users, then we can have the users dot, we can have the map, right? We can use the map of the users, and we would be getting the item, the each user item. With that, we can have the user like that. We have the user, and after that, let's move on. Let's just display anything. Like we can have the div like that. We have the div over there, and we can display anything. So inside the div, we can have the user dot id, something like that. We can have this like that. So there you can see now we are displaying the ID of all of those users. Right, now we have ID of all of those users. If we move on to the console, you can see each user have an ID. So here we are declaring the ID. And here you can see we have the login as well. If we just move on with the login, if we have the user.login here, you can see now we have the login names of the users, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. But here I think instead of displaying only one property, we can also display the avatar of those users, right? We can have a cleaner code inside this list, and we can display the name, the image and avatar of the user, the icon of the user, or we can have the login name of the user. So we can do that. So here you can see we are using the div. So what if I use a separate component for that, for each user item? So that would be pretty good. So let's move on. So here we have the user dot, we have the JSX like that. And here again, we can have the RFCE over there. We have the user component. And here we can accept a couple of things from the user. We can expect the login name over there, the login name, the avatar URL. So if we move on to the inspect panel, we can move on to the console. So here you can see we have the avatar URL as well, right? We have the avatar URL like this. We can have the avatar URL like this, and we can also display something more, right? We can have, I think we can have the login and avatar. That's it. I think we can only have these two parameters, right? It would work perfectly fine. So here we can have the stylings inside this component as well. So first let's move on to the users. So here we have the users, and here we have the each separate user. We can close other files, right? So here we have the list of the users, and it seems to be working perfectly fine. And here you can see if I refresh this application, you can see it is totally working fine. So here you can see if I just move on to the network tab, and you can see if I just slow down the speed, what happens? If we move on with suppose the slow 3G, if we refresh, you can see now the network speed would be slow. That example would be rendered, then all of those lists. So here you can see first this example would be rendered and then the list. So here we can just display a loading bar till that. So for the loading bar, again, we can either use another state. So let's do that. So we can have the use state for that. Again, we have the use state, or we can have the loading, and we can have the set loading, and by default value would be, we can have the true like that. So initially it would be loading, so we can have the true. First we can again have the set loading to the true, then we can move on. We have the then, once we get the data from the response, then only what we can do. So we can again have the then statement, and in here we can have the set loading turned out to be false. We have the set loading to the false, and everything should work perfectly fine. And here inside the section, once again we can have another div, and we can render this div conditionally, right? We already discussed that how we can render conditionally. So we can have, if we have the loading equals to the true, then only we want to display this div, and inside that we can have the loading like that. We have the loading. So if we again move on to the application, if again that's a slow 3G, if we again move on, you can see if we again refresh, so now the loading should be displayed. I think it must be displayed. Yeah. So if I just disable the cache, and let's try it out once again. So I think it should be visible, right? So there we go. Now we see the loading bar over there, and then we have the list displayed. So you can see that's how it works. You can say it is working perfectly fine. So now we are displaying the loading bar as well, and that functionality is also completed. And now the final functionality is, now we want to display each user's item inside or from the user component. So let's move on. So here you can see we have the div. We can give some styles to div. We can have the div, we can have the display, that should be, we can have the flex, and we can have the flex direction, or we can keep it to row. We can have the width or something, that should be, we can have the 100%. We have the full width over there like this. We have the 100%, and after that inside this div, or what we can do over there, so we can remove this div. We can remove this div first, and then what we can do, so either we can declare the div here. We have the style, we have the display over there like that. We have the display, that could be, we can have the flex, we have the width, that could be, we can have the 100%. So that's a container for each list item. So that's a container for the list, and we can keep this code inside this div. We can render that inside this div over there like this. And after that, for each user item, we would be displaying the user component. So here we have the user component for each list item, right? So if we again move on to the applications, so there you can see now we are only seeing the users property over here, the user. So here we want to display the actual data as well. And before that, we can have the wrap property of the flex. So we can have the flex wrap. That should be, again, we can have the wrap like this. So if we again move on, and if we just decrease the screen size, now you can see now these things would be there. And we can also just have the gap property as well. So we can have the gap, that should be somewhere around 4 like that. So now we would be having some gap between the items. That's it. And now here you can see we are rendering the list. So here we should be given here the key as well. So we can have the user.id as the key. So everything should work perfectly fine. And now the things should be done inside the user component. So here we can have the CSS file as well for the user. We can have the user.css, and inside that we can just have the container like that. For each user item, we can have the container over there like this. Container could again have somewhere around display. We can have the flex, we can have the flex direction like that. Flex direction, that should be the column, because we need the items on top of each other. And then what we can do, first we can render the image, then we can render the name of that user. So we're gonna justify content center, item center, we can have align items to the center like that. We can have the padding as well, that should be 10 pixels over there. And now let's move on. So here we can move on, and we can have the image tag as well. We can use the image. We can have the width of around 100% of parent container. And what we can do else, we can skip that. We can have the 100% of the width, and that's it. Now we can move on to the user. So here we have a div. We can have the class name of, we have the container for each item, and we want to import the user.css as well. We have the import user.css like that. So now this should be imported, and here we want to render something. So that's a container. So first we can render the image over there. We can render the image. The source would be the avatar URL like that. So it should be the avatar URL, and the alt should be, we can give the name of the user, like the login of the user like that. And after that we can move on. We can have the paragraph tag, which should display the name. So we can have the login like that. And I think that's enough for that. Or we can move on to the CSS. We can have a border something. We can have the border. We have the 1 pixel solid. We can have something around, we can have the black like that. We can have the border radius as well. So border radius 10 pixels should be enough. So let's see what happens. So here you can see now we have some borders, like you can see now we have this type of things, because we haven't given any data. So let's give some data as well. And before that, we want to give some separate width for that as well. We can have the width of around 300 pixels for that, for each item, right? We can have the width of 300 pixels. We can have a fixed height of somewhere around, we can have the 100 pixels like that. So that would be the list items for each user item, right? So that should be visible for that. And now let's move on to the users.jsx. So here we can provide some of the props like avatar URL. That should be, we can have the user.avatar URL. So you can see now we have the avatars of all of those users. And now what we can do, we can have the login as well. We have the login over there like this. The login, that should be, we can have the user dot, we can have the login like that. So there you can see now it seems to be working perfectly fine. Right, now it is working perfectly fine. So that's how it works. And we can also adjust the styling on or on. So if you want to adjust according to you, you can adjust the styling over there. So what we can do, we can have the width of 300 pixels, right? Then we can have the width of around, we can give the width of around somewhere around, we can give 300, that should be around 150 pixels over there. For the width over there, you can see now we have the width. We can have a height as well. We can have the height of around 70 pixels or 80 pixels over there. So here we have the height like that, and here we have the names. So you can see these are the stylings. So you know the stylings are not good, but you can see now we got the data from an API, and that's a huge success from our side. You can see now we are displaying the list of the data from an API URL, and if we refresh, first we see the loading bar over there. You can see if we refresh, or if we open that inside the incognito, first we see the loading bar, then we have the list of all of those users. You can see it is working perfectly fine. So that's how we can create the applications with the React. So that was a perfect example in which you must have learned something with the React. So let's wrap up this project, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. And I will now push the code to the GitHub as well. So we can have the complete over there like that. We can commit that, and we can push the code to the GitHub. That's it for this project. And now let's move forward with another hook inside the React, which is a useRef. So earlier we created the example of the form handling, and we used the useState and useEffect hook. But now let's move forward with another hook, which is a useRef, and it is very important hook inside the React. So useRef is a hook which allows to access the DOM properties and their methods without triggering the re-render. So what does this mean? So useRef is a hook which provides a way to interact with the DOM properties and methods of an element. So suppose we have an element, suppose we have the input element, right? So useRef will allow us to grab the DOM properties and methods of that input element, and we can change their values, we can change the ID, we can change the name or anything with that. So the useRef will allow us to access the DOM properties and values of that element. That could be any element, that could be any form as well, that could be an input element, that could be the button, that could be any navigation bar, link or anything. So we can just grab the DOM properties and methods of that element with the help of the useRef. And there's another advantage of using the useRef hook, that it does not trigger the re-render, right? So it does not trigger the re-render, and with the useRef, if we change any value, so suppose if we hardcode any value inside the input, so that value would be persisted across multiple re-renders of the React. So suppose if any state changes and the components get re-rendered, but if we change any value with the useRef, it will persist across multiple re-renders. So that's a huge advantage of using the useRef with considering the performance, because having the unnecessary renders inside any React application is not recommended. So we can have multiple states, suppose there could be multiple links, multiple navigation buttons or anything. So if any button changes, the whole component gets re-rendered. Because it will have a huge impact on the performance as well. So let's learn more about the useRef first. So it is used for the communication with the DOM properties of an element. So it is an uncontrolled element. So what is uncontrolled element? So controlled elements are those elements which state and their values are controlled by the React. So if there is any h1 tag, or suppose again an input tag, so if we change any value inside the input, so React will take care of those values, and React will automatically persist those values inside all of the re-renders. But if we have any uncontrolled element, it means that element would be controlled by us. So we can grab the DOM properties and methods of that element, and we can control the element by own. So that element will not be controlled by the React. And we have a current property which accesses the DOM methods and properties. So with the useRef, once we define the useRef hook, then we will get the current property which will grab all of the DOM methods and properties of that element. And here we have the syntax. We have the const element ref. Suppose that could be any element, that could be the form as well, the h1, h2, button, or anything that we have of the HTML. and we just define that element with the useRef hook. That's it. So now we have learned about the useRef theoretically. Now let's move on to the React's official documentation and let's see what does the React say about this hook. So I'm into the react.dev. Again, we can move on. We can have the useRef over there. So here we have the useRef. So useRef is a React hook that lets you reference a value that's not needed for re-rendering. So here we have the const ref equals to useRef. We have some value of that ref. So you can see we have the interval ref, we have the input ref or anything like that. And we have the initial value. Suppose we have the initial value, suppose we have the interval or anything like that. And the uses is, you can say we have the interval ref, we have the ref property of the interval. So it's not only limited to any React element or any h1 element. We can use it for anything. We can have the count variable as well. We can have anything like that. And you can see, suppose we have the interval ref, then we will have a current property there. We have the current property, which is equals to an interval ID that we have defined with the set interval. So here we have a couple of examples like that. Like you can see here, we have a useRef of 0. Suppose we just need to show you a very simple example of the count. We have the ref equals to useRef. Then we have the ref.current equals to ref.current plus 1. So initially the ref.current value would be 0. So we always have a current property there. So initially the value would be 0. Then we can have the ref.current plus equals to 1. And here you can see alert, you click this property this times like that. Once we click that, you can see 1 times. And now we again have the handle click. So once we click the button, this function is gonna execute. And here you can see we have this ref.current. It will increment it by 1. Again, you can see you click 2 times. So that is the ref. And again, we can use it for any timer as well like that. So we can have as many use cases as we want with the useRef. And now let's move on with our example. So now we'll be creating an example with the useRef. So we'll create an element and we will change their values and all with the help of useRef hook. And we will see if the component gets re-rendered or not. So let's move on. So here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new file there inside the hooks. I've created a new folder of the hooks and all of the examples of the hooks will be placed inside the hooks folder. So let's create another hook. That could be, we can have the use ref example dot, we have the JSX. So here we have this file and here again we can run the REFC events again. I showed you earlier. We have the import React, that's not needed anymore. Then inside the app.jsx, so we can run here the useRef example over there like that. And then we can open the development server. It's already open for me. We can open the 5173 over there. So here you can see now we have the useRef example. So what examples should I show you? So first let's see the useRef. So first what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna import the useRef. So we can have the import, we can have something from, we can have the React and we can import the useRef from there. So we have the useRef over there like that. And now let's move on. So suppose I define the ref over there as per the syntax. We have the const, suppose we have the heading ref. We have the heading ref like that, and that should be equals to, we have the useRef over there. We have the useRef. And after that, what do we want to do? So we should have that element over there. Like if we are defining the heading ref, we should have the heading tag over there inside there, and we should provide the value of the ref. So inside the React, we have the ref property over there. We can have the ref, and that ref should be equals to this heading ref like this. We have the ref equals to the heading ref. So ref just means a reference. You can just identify that as a reference, like the heading reference equals to this reference. So heading element is now referenced to this heading ref. And after that, what we can do, we can have highs, and after that we can just log the value. We can have the log, we can have the heading ref over there, and let's see what happens. If we move on to the inspect over there, console over there, you can see here we have the object, right? We have the object. And once we open that object over there, you can see inside the current property, we have the h1 element. Right, now we have the h1 element, and there you can see once we open the current, you can see all of the properties of the DOM. You can see all of the methods, the functions of the DOM can now be accessible with that. You can see the ID, the hidden element. We can just have any type of things, like we can have the auto focus, auto capitalize, and everything with that, even on cut, on click functions and all. You can see that's how we can just reference any value with the help of useRef. You can see, if we see another example, like after the component would be rendered, suppose I add the useEffect over there, we have the useEffect over there like that. And suppose inside this, you can see we have this like that. We have the callback function and we have the empty array of dependencies. And after that, we can have the heading ref dot, we can have the current dot, suppose we have the value. So the h1 element should have the value or the inner HTML. So we can have the inner text or inner HTML. So suppose we have the inner text. So we can have the current dot inner text equals to, we can have the ref updated like that. We have the ref updated, and let's see how it works. So if we move on, so here we have something like optional chaining assign is not currently enabled, support for the experimental syntax. So what's happening over there? Let's see how it works. So you can see now it's okay. You can see once we just refresh it again, you can see once we just refresh, so initially the value would be the high of the element, but after the useEffect ran, because the useEffect runs after the component has been rendered, after the component has been added to DOM. So after this component was calculated and created and rendered, then this function ran and it updated the value of the useRef. You can see that's how it's gonna work. You can see it is working perfectly fine. And with the help of that, we can use the useRef for anything. And we can use the useRef for multiple things. Suppose we have an input tag, we can just give the focus to any element. Like suppose we have the input element as well. So here we have the input over there like that. We have the input and we can provide the ref as well. So we can have the ref over there and we can have another ref for that. We can have the ref. Suppose we have the input ref over there like this, the input ref, and we have the useRef, and here we have the input ref. And after the useEffect will run, then what we can do, we can have the input ref dot, we can have the current dot, we can have the focus. So element will be get focused. So if we move on, if we just refresh the page, you can see now the input is in focus. You can press F5 and you can press anything in your keyboard. You can see now the input element was in focus, because now we have the properties and values with the useRef. And another thing to mention, if we add the log statement over there, we add the log like this, like the component re-render. So we have the component re-rendered. So if we refresh, you can see if we refresh the web page, you can see the initially the component was re-rendered. And the useRef is not just limited to the HTML elements. So you can also use that for the JavaScript elements as well. So suppose we have an element, suppose we have the value of an object, or we can have the value of a counter. So we can have the cons, we can have the counter ref over there like this. We have the counter ref that should be equals to, we can have the useRef over there like this. And initially the counter ref is equals to 0. And after that, what do we want to do? So we don't need to display the counter ref inside UI because it is a JavaScript element. So we just need to display the HTML elements inside the browser, not the JavaScript elements, because now we are showing you the example of the JavaScript. And suppose we have a button over there like this. Suppose we have here the button over there. We have the on click inside the button. We have the on click. That should be, we can have the handle click like that. We have the handle click over there like this. And inside this, we can have the increment like that. We have the increment over there, and I'm just showing you the dummy example of the JavaScript with using the useRef. And we can have the const, we can have the handle click, that should be equals to a normal arrow function. And this is referenced to this button. And after that, suppose we have the counter ref, and on clicking of that button, first we can increase the value of the counter ref dot current. We can have the counter ref dot current equals to counter ref dot current plus we can have here something around 10. And after that, we can just log that value as well. We can have the log, we have the counter ref dot current. So here we are not just using this counter ref for displaying something inside the UI, but we are doing for the internal JavaScript operations. So we can also use the useRef for that. So suppose if we move on, if we refresh, so here we have the increment. So once we hit on the increment, you can see the increment is working perfectly fine. You can see it is working fine, and we can use the useRef for both HTML elements and both internal JavaScript elements as well. You can use it for much more operations like the API request and all with that. So that's the useRef hook for you, and it is very helpful, and it can have many use cases. So we will see the useRef hook inside the examples as well. So let's just focus on more hooks first. So that's the useRef hook for you. So now you have learned another hook inside the React, which is great about the useRef. So now let's move on to another hook of the React, which is the useReducer hook. So let's learn about this hook, and this is very important hook inside the React. So let's move on. So what is the useReducer hook? So useReducer is another hook to manage the state inside any application, but it is mainly focused on managing the complex state logic by dispatching some actions. So what does this mean? So useReducer inside the React, it's a hook that provides a way to manage the complex state logic inside the functional components. So it is useful when the state transitions depends on the previous state. So inside the useReducer, we already know the previous state, and we only want to create a new state. We create the copy of the previous state, and then we send that state to the UI. So it involves multiple steps for managing the state. So that's why we have this hook, which is used to manage the complex state logic. So let's learn more about it. So it can handle complex state management logic, and it is similar to Redux pattern. So if you are suppose familiar with the Redux, then it would be very helpful for you, but it's not required because I'm gonna show you everything with the useReducer. So it is similar to Redux, and it is widely used for expensive calculations. Suppose we have some expensive calculations on the UI, that could be any game as well, because it can handle a complex state for that. So useReducer hook is just like a hook which generates a state and which automatically updates the state. So inside the useState hook, we just use the set state, but inside the useReducer, we want to create a new upcoming copy of that state that is shown to the user. So that's major difference with that. And with the useReducer, it identifies the state update via dispatching actions and payload. So we dispatch some actions, like we send some action to the main function which handles the logic. Like suppose if you want to increment a counter, we dispatch the action like the counter needs to be incremented, and that goes to the main reducer function. So reducer function is the function which manages the state, and the action goes to that, and it just identifies that action, like which action they are talking about, and they just create a new copy for that state, and that state gets updated. So it's a huge process for that. And we have the syntax as well. So first we have the const, and inside the array again we have two values. We have the state and we have the dispatch, and that's equals to the useReducer hook. So inside the useReducer hook, the first parameter that we provide the reference to the reducer function. So we provide the reference to a reducer function, and then inside the second parameter, we provide the initial state. So the initial state of our application is being shared as a second parameter, and the reducer function is the function which manages the entire state of your application, which is using the useReducer. So that's it. And here we have the state. So the state would be always the latest snapshot of our state, which the reducer function updates. So state will always be the latest if you want to grab the value. And here we have the dispatch, which sends an action to the reducer function. So these two have a connection in common, the dispatch and the reducer function. So once we use dispatch, so the action is being sent to the reducer function, and then it manages that. So that's a bit complicated to learn, but I will simplify it for you. So let's move on to the React's official documentation about that, and then let's move on to our application to just create a new example of the useReducer. So let's move on. So head over to the react.dev, and again here what you can do, you can have the useReducer for that like this. So it's a useReducer that lets you add a reducer to a component. So reducer is just a type of function which can update the state. So let's move on first. So here we have the const state and dispatch equals to the useReducer, reducer initial arguments and init. And then you can see here we have suppose a reducer. So here we have the function reducer, and inside the reducer function we always have the last state snapshot, and the latest action which was sent by the dispatch. And action can contain two properties: the type, so the type is always a string from which we can identify about the action, suppose the increment or decrement or anything like that, and the payload property. Payload is a data that we send via the dispatch. So here inside the useReducer we have the reducer function which is reference to this function. Then we have the age equals to 42. So here we have the dispatch function as well, which is returned by useReducer, which lets us update the state to a different value. So we update the state with the help of dispatching. So we dispatch some action. So like you can see the dispatch, we can send the type property. So type could be anything like incremented or anything. So it updates the state. So I think you are a bit confused about that. So let's move on to our example. So here, what do you want to do? Again, we can create another hook example. That could be, we can have the use reducer example over there like that. Dot, we have the GSX over there like this. And again, what we can do, we can have the ref fce once again. And here we can again move on to the app.jsx. And we can execute this over there. We have the use reducer example. So if we save, so now we should see it here. Like, right, so it's working perfectly fine. And now let's move on to the application once again. So here, what do we want to do? So first, let's see a very basic example. So example could be again for a counter, or let's say for a player. So a player has to run a couple of steps. So let's see the example for that. So first we need to define that. We have the const something equals to, we have the use reducer. And after that, first we need to provide a reducer function. So you know that on every state change, the component gets recalculated. But the reducer function inside the useReducer does not need to be recalculated because it is just a static function that does not get anything from this component, from the state of a component. So inside the reducer function, if we provide any function, so we can declare that function outside of that component so that it does not recalculate every time, because that reducer function have a complex logic, can have an expensive complex logic over there. So we can have the const reducer function like that, reducer function like this. So that should be equals to a function over there. And inside the useReducer, first we can have the reducer function, and then we can have the initial state of a component as well. So suppose we have here the const, we can have the initial state as well. And initial state can also be moved on before the component because it also does not need to be re-updated every time because it is just used for the initial purpose. That's it. So here we have the initial state, and after that what we can do, so we can have the steps like this. That should be equals to, we can have the 0. And here we can provide the initial state over there like this. So here we have the initial state of a component like this. And it returns, first it returns the state, the latest state. We have the state over there. Then it returns the dispatch function. So here we have the dispatch over there like this. We have the dispatch. And let's move on. So what we can do, so again we can first give here some rendering components. So first we can have the paragraph, we can have the player has moved like this. Player has moved. Suppose we can have player has moved this number of steps. We can have the state, we can use this state over there like this. We have this state over there. So player has used state dot this property, the steps over there, because the state is the state over there. We can have the state dot, then we can have the steps like this. We have the steps dot, I think we have the steps over there. We have the state dot steps, steps like this. So player has moved this amount of steps. And after that, we can have two buttons as well inside the div. So we can have style, we can have the display over there like this. Over there, the display should be, we can have the flex to render the buttons inside a row basis. Then we can have the justify content, that should be inside the center. We can have the gap between them, that should be somewhere around, we can have the 10 over there. Sorry, it should be the 10. And after that, there could be two buttons. We can have the button, we can have here the move. Again, we can have the move, or we can have the move forward like that, move forward, and we can again move on. So we can copy and we can paste over there like move backward. So here we have two buttons. So let's see how it looks over there. So there you can see initially we have player has moved 0 steps. So if you again refresh, you can see now player has moved 0 steps. So once we click on the move forward, so player should move 1 step further. And if we click on move backward, the player should move 1 step backwards. So we need to manage that with the help of this, the dispatch function, and we need to send a couple of things to the reducer function to manage that. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to check the properties. So we can move on to React's official documentation once again. You can see here inside the reducer function, we get two parameters, the state and the action. So let's move on. So there you can see inside that you have here the state and the action. So state is the latest state, like the last state snapshot, and then you have the action. So inside the action, you have a property of the type. So there you have the action.type, which we send via dispatch. So inside the dispatch, we send the type property, which gets covered here. The action.type equals to this, and here as well we have this type, the same type over there. So here we have the state, then we have the action over there like that. We have the action. And then what do we want to do? So here we can have a if check over there, like if the action over there, the action.type equals to, we have the forward. So we can have the forward over there. So if the action.type equals to forward, then we want to do something else, or else we want to do again something else. So else, if suppose if we have the action.type over there equals to, we have the backward like that. So we want to do something else. So with the help, so with the useReducer, if and else if statements are not recommended. So the React recommends that we should use the switch statements over there. So we can have again have the switch, then we can have the action dot, we can have the type over there. We have the action dot type, and inside that we can handle multiple cases over there. So we can have the case again, here we can have the forward over there like that. And again, we can have the case for the backward as well. So we have the case forward, then we can move on. We can have again the case over there like this. So we can have the case over there. That should be, we can have the backward like that. We have the backward. So what do we want to do? So inside both cases, we want to return a new copy of a state. So with the Redux, we always create a new copy of the state. So the state management logic is ours. So we want to create a new copy of a state. So what we can do? So inside the forward, if we want to create a new copy and we want to return that, so we can have the return over there. We can have the return, and inside the object, what do we want to do? Because the state is always an object with the property of the steps. Then we can have the steps over there, and that should be equals to, we have the state dot, we can have the steps plus 1 like this. You can see now we are returning a new copy of the state with the steps equals to state dot steps plus 1. And with the help of backward, what we can do? So we can have the return. Again, we can have the steps over there. That should be equals to, we can have the state dot steps over there minus 1. So that's how we can handle multiple cases. And there should also be a default case as well, the default. So inside the default case, we can return the state itself like that. So there should be 3 cases like that. So we have the switch action dot type, case of forward, case of backward, and the default case. And now you can see if we move on to the UI, nothing is gonna change because we haven't linked anything over there. So you can see inside both of those buttons. So inside this button, we can have the on click over there like this. We can have the on click. That should be, we can have the handle like this. We can have the handle forward like this. We have the handle forward. And for this, we can have the on click over there. We can have the handle backwards like that. So inside the handle forward, we can move on. We can create that function. We can have the const handle forward equals to a function, which is reference to this button. And we can have the backwards as well. We can have the const, we can have the handle backwards equals to a function, which gets reference to that button like that. So that's how it's gonna work. So inside the handle forward, what do we wanna do? So once we hit on this button on the move forward, we want to dispatch an action to this reducer logic that we can just send an action with some type. Like we have the case of the forward, then we have the case of the backward. So we can send a dispatch over there like this. We can have here the dispatch over there. We have the dispatch. So that should be used here. We have the dispatch, and inside that we want to send an action. So here we have the action. So we can also create an action like this. So we can have the const, we can have the action over there. That should be equals to, we can have the type over there. We can have the type, that should be this type. We can have the forward, that should be this forward. And we can dispatch the action like this. And that's it. So here you can see what we have done is we created an action. So this action is gonna send here. So once we call the dispatch, so this action will be sent here, and then according to this action.type property, it will update the state. Right, so now we have dispatch action and everything should work perfectly fine. So let's see what happens if we refresh. So fingers are crossed. So once we hit on the move forward, you can see the state is updating. Right, the player has moved 3 steps. Again we click on move forward, the player has moved 4 steps. You can see it's working totally fine. But once we hit on the move backward, you can see nothing is being changed. You can see nothing is changing. And now let's move on and let's handle the move backwards as well. So here we have the move backward button. We are referenced to the handle backwards, and here we can do the same. We can have the action. So we can have const action equals to the type should be different. So this time the type should be the backward, and that's it. Because now we have the action of type of the backward and we are dispatching the same action over there. So let's move on. So if we again refresh, so the player moves forward around 3 steps, and once we hit on the move backward, you can see now the player has moved 2 steps. You can see that's how the useReducer hook works. You can see we update the state from this reducer function. We create a new copy of a state and then we return that. And there you can see it works perfectly fine. And you can see it is working fine. So here you can see what we have done is we have just forwarded the type. So we just forwarded the type. You can see the type could be static. But what if we want to send some actual value inside the action to this reducer function? Suppose the player jumps and it moves forward like 3 steps. So what we can do, we can have a dynamic action as well. So inside the action, we can have the dynamic property, and that property is being sent to the reducer. So we can do that as well. So suppose we have the input tag as well like this. We can have the input after these 2 buttons. We can have another div, and inside this we can have the input over there like this, the input type of this, and then what we can do, we can have some value like this, some value, and the input value can be there with another state. We can have the use state for that. We can have the input val and set input value. Initially it should be empty string, and there inside this value we can have the input value over there. We have the input value, and with the on change, what we can do, we can have this set input value, and that should be equals to, we can grab the event, it should be event target dot, we can have the value over there like that. So we are just doing a very simple state handling logic, very simple form handling logic. And after that we get another button over there, and inside that we can have the on click over there like this. We have the on click, and inside that we can have another function. We can have handle custom steps. Suppose the player moves a custom dynamic steps, so we can do that as well. We have the custom steps, on click equals to, we have the custom steps like that. And inside this, what we can do? So inside this handle custom steps, so we can accept a parameter as well. So we can accept a parameter, like we can have the steps like that. We have the steps count. So that could be the count of the steps. So that could be the number. And here inside the on click, we can have the callback function instead of calling that. And here what we can do, we can just call that. We can give the step counts of any count. So the count should be this input value. So the count should be this input value. Here we have the input value. So we can have here, first we can convert the string to the number with using the number. Then we can have the input value over there like that. And it could be, we can have the increment dynamic, or we can have the increment custom over there like that. We have the custom. So here you can see we have this button over there. You can see move forward, move backward, and we have increment custom. So for that we need to provide a value over there. So the value will be get updated here, right? The value will be get updated, and here we have the button. It's also works. It should also work. But how do we create an action with a dynamic value which we receive from any parameter? So inside the action, you can see we have the type property. Then inside the type, first we need to create a new type. So inside the reducer functions, we are accepting two types, the forward and the backward. So we should create a new type first. So we can have the case over there. We can have the case, so we can have the custom like that. So here we have the case of custom, and it should work perfectly fine like this over there, the case of the custom. And here, what do we want to do? So inside this action, we can provide another property, which is a payload. So we can have the payload property, and the payload property can contain any dynamic data that we send to the reducer function. So we can send any dynamic data to the reducer function with the help of the payload property. So here the payload could be, again, we can have the number. That should be, we can have the steps count over there like this. We can have payload, the number of the steps count. And here the case is custom. So this time the type should be equals to, we can have the custom. So let's move on. So here we have the custom over there. Then we can have the return over there. That should be, again, we can have the steps. That should be equals to, this time we can have the state dot steps, plus this time we'll be having the action dot, we can have the payload property, because here we have sent the payload property. So this gets executed here. So the value that we send inside the payload property, we would be getting this value inside this action over there. So that's how it's gonna work. So let's try it out. So let's re-verify once again. So we have the const action, we have type of the custom, we have the payload of the steps count, and then we are dispatching this action. And then you can see here we have the case of the custom, we have the return, we have the steps equals to the action dot payload, and it should work perfectly fine. You can see initially if we refresh, if we just test the previous functionality, the move forward, it is working fine. Move backward, it is also working fine. But suppose if I enter, like suppose 10 steps. So if we hit on the increment custom, so there we go. You can see now we have the 12 steps. And here if we again click on increment custom, 22 steps, 32 steps, you can see it is working perfectly fine. You can see we can move forward, backward, and we have the custom forwarding logic as well. So you can see that's how the useReducer works. So now you can see it was very easy. So I made it very simple for you. We just have a switch statement in which we are checking the type, and from that type only, we are creating a new copy of a state. That's it. And here, every time we are generating a new action with a type property, and from that type property, we verify that inside the reducer function that which action is being sent by the front end, then we can update that thing. That's it, right? Because we haven't used any rocket science over there. It's just very simple. We are just checking with the action.types. It is just the basic conditions of a function. So you can see that's how we can use the useReducer hook. And this was a basic example, and you can use it for a form handling as well. You can have all of the fields of a form inside the initial state. You can update according to the name of a value, updating the ID, updating from the ID, updating from anything like that. You can use for the shopping cart application as well, increment or decrement or adding a custom product like that. You can do a lot of things like that. You can see that's how it works. So now we showed you the static fields as well, the forward and the backward. We showed you the dynamic field as well. So that's all about the useReducer hook inside the React. So welcome back everyone. So in this slide, we are not gonna cover any concept of the React, but instead we congratulate you on completing the phase 1 of our tutorial. So now we have covered the basic concepts, and now you have enough knowledge of the React that you can build some of the basic projects with it. That could be a to-do list, that could be fetching the data from an external API, handling the forms with the React. We have the dynamic way of handling the forms we showed you, right? So now you have enough knowledge with the React. So the phase 1 ends here. So till this step, there was the phase 1, and now we would be moving on to the next phase of this tutorial. So next phase includes a couple of advanced things that we can do with the React, that how we can build the real world applications, how we can face the challenges with them, and a lot of the things. So once again, congratulations to you all. And if you have followed me through, then it will be very easy to get back to the phase 2 of this tutorial. So without wasting much time, let's move on to the phase 2 of this tutorial. So here we have the phase 2. So in this slide, we are going to discuss a couple of concepts regarding the phase 2. Like what will be the concepts that we are going to cover, and till this step what we have covered. So we are going to cover everything with this slide. So now we have covered the basics of the React, and now we have to take our skills to a next level. So inside the phase 2, you will have some understanding that how we can build the real world applications with the React. So you will get to know the concepts which are required for that, and you will get to know some of the performance optimizations and all with the React. So we will take our skills to a next level where we can create a real world applications with the React. So phase 2 covers the important concepts which are used in a day-to-day life of a front-end developer. So in a day-to-day life of a front-end developer, there are some concepts which we need to cover, like managing the application state, not just for a single component, but for the application-wide component. So we are going to cover a lot of the things regarding that. We have the routing features and all. So we will cover a lot of them. So let's discuss all of them once again. So here inside the phase 2, we are going to cover the routing with the React. So we are going to cover the client side routing. We are going to cover that how we can create the dynamic routes, and we are going to cover the context API with the React as well. So with the help of context API, we can manage the application wide state, like this state that can be shared across multiple components, and we don't need to use the props for that. So we can cover the concepts like that in the phase 2. And there would be another concept inside the phase 2, that application wide state management. So we won't just be using the context API, but we'll also be exploring some of the libraries which can be used to further have some application wide state management. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Redux. So we will use the Redux as well within the phase 2, and we will show you how you can use the Redux to build the complex applications with the React. And don't forget, we will be having another concept of the React inside the phase 2, which is the performance optimizations. So this could be very advanced concept of the React, that how we can enhance the performance of the React applications. Because performance in any application is a very big step to achieve. So we will achieve the performance optimizations within this application, within this tutorial as well. So that's all for the phase 2 that we are gonna cover. So there are just 4 concepts, but they are very important to know and they are very difficult to learn as well. But I'm here, I will simplify everything for you. So there would be another phase for us. After that, we will move to the phase 3. So there are 3 phases inside this tutorial. So after the phase 2, we are gonna cover the phase 3 as well. So phase 3, so we don't be having the development with the phase 3, but we will be building some production ready, some production grade applications with the React, which you can put into your resume as well. So inside the phase 3, we are gonna cover the projects. We are gonna cover a couple of projects with the React, and you can add those projects. You can highlight in your resume as well. You can highlight or you can deploy that and you can show it to the world as well. So we'll be having the phase 3 of the tutorial with the projects and deployment of the React applications. So that's all with this introduction of the phase 2. And now let's move on to the phase 2. So first we are gonna cover the context API of the phase 2. Then we will cover the routing with the React. Then we will cover the Redux, some of the Redux libraries with that. Then we will discuss about the Redux as well, the application wide state management. Then we are gonna cover the performance optimization with the React as well. So that is a complete tutorial in which you will learn the React from directly scratch to the deployment. So that's it for this introduction. And now let's just get back to the tutorial.